The Princess of Valdina gave her a charming man who gently begged, "Please, call me Jason." She truly believed his devoted kisses were the promise of a lifetime, but she is about to learn a very harsh truth. Absolute devotion to the wrong man only breeds absolute ruin. Now the golden memories of his sweet proposal mock her from the dripping shadows of a freezing dungeon. She sacrificed her entire life to pave his bloody path to power. Yet, as he stalks down the corridor toward her cell, his face is a mask of cold stone. The warmth he once showed her is entirely gone. Bound in heavy iron on the dirty floor, she desperately breathes his name one last time. Does he feel any remorse at all? His loyal guards instantly scream at her insolence for daring to speak to the king. She destroyed herself for this man. Now, she can only watch as he casts her aside to crown a shining saintess. She didn't just offer him her innocent love. She actively stole her own kingdom's most sacred treasures and spent her fleeting youth covered in gore to slay a mad dragon. She even marched the very last soldiers of her motherland straight into his waiting hands. She quite literally handed him the ultimate prize, placing the radiant crown he desperately coveted right onto his golden head. But he gave her nothing but an agonizing betrayal in return. Her brother is dead. Her once beautiful homeland is crumbling into silent, inescapable ruin. Jason dares to claim his betrayal is simply the will of the Oracle. He actually expects gratitude for temporarily naming their son, Rian, as the crown prince. But Rian is already dead. He barely lasted 6 months alone in the treacherous imperial palace. Standing over her little boy's casket, Medea finally understood the horrifying reality. She and her daughter, Rhea, would undoubtedly be next. Now, Jason stares down at her with hollow eyes, citing a convenient new revelation that she and her daughter will bring ruin to the empire. He calls it mercy to grant her a quick death out of respect for their past. He genuinely cannot fathom why she still harbors resentment. What a profoundly empty man. Medea doesn't even bother screaming at him anymore. She simply tells him to just end it, utterly disgusted by his pathetic face. Then the king drops a casual, devastating apology. He says he is sorry about the children and that she won't be lonely where she is going. The plural word completely paralyzes her. Both children? Rhea is supposed to be safely hidden away. Footsteps echo through the damp stone. The radiant new saintess steps into the dungeon's light, offering a sickeningly sweet apology. But Medea's panicked eyes lock onto the person standing right behind her, Verna. Medea had entrusted her precious little girl to her most loyal maid to escape the bloodbath. Now, staring at the undeniable proof of betrayal, her final shred of hope burns to absolute ash. The agonizing memory of Rhea's tearful goodbye violently crashes over Medea. Verna actually dares to claim handing an innocent child over to be slaughtered was an act of loyalty. The saintess smiles sweetly, mocking Medea's frozen horror. Then Jason coldly twists the knife. He insists their murdered children will surely understand his righteous choice. Something inside Medea finally shatters. She lunges at the man she once adored with everything she had, her heavy iron chain screaming against the damp stone. Honestly, I hope she rips his throat out with her bare hands. She howls until her throat completely tears, cursing him as a pathetic, disgusting monster. How can a father do this? Even a wild beast wouldn't butcher its own flesh and blood just to secure a shiny throne. The saintess merely sighs with fake, practiced pity. But Jason doesn't even flinch. He simply orders his shouting guards to stand down, playing the magnanimous ruler sparing a madwoman's wretched life. With a sickeningly polite farewell, he turns his back on the woman who handed him the empire. He gently escorts his fragile new empress away from the dungeon. But before leaving, the saintess pauses in the shadows. A small object hits the filthy floor right by Medea's chained hands. It is a little red pouch. The exact same pouch Medea tied around Rhea's neck on the night she desperately tried to save her. Her baby girl's final, terrified cries for her mother echo forever in the suffocating dark. Clutching the tiny pouch, Medea can almost hear her daughter's final, terrified cries, but her grief is immediately drowned out by hysterical laughter. The radiant new saintess, who was actually Medea's own cousin, gleefully rubs salt into her deepest wounds. She sadistically mocks the brutal slaughter of Medea's brother, screaming that Valdina's total collapse is entirely the princess's fault. Medea realizes this suffocating hell is a bottomless abyss paved completely by her own foolish choices. She quite literally traded her family's lives to buy a glittering crown for a monster. To make matters worse, Verna smiles without a shred of guilt. The saintess maliciously thanks Medea for doing all their heavy lifting. After all, her homeland's fierce loyalists wouldn't have fallen so easily without the princess's naive interference. The horrifying reality finally clicks. Jason and your family were in league from the start, Medea whispers. Her cousin smiles, proudly confirming the betrayal. Even the legendary artifacts Medea secured for Jason were part of their elaborate trap. Medea's entire existence was nothing but a pathetic puppet show, orchestrated by her treacherous uncle. Thanks to her blind devotion, he now gets to rule the bloody ruins of Valdina, while his smug daughter claims the imperial throne. And Jason? He was willingly holding her strings all along. How could she have been so incredibly blind? As her cousin walks away, tossing back a final sneer about Medea joining her dead family soon, a chilling silence fills the dungeon. The sorrow vanishes, replaced by absolute, seething fury. Staring through the blood and suffocating shadows, Medea glares at her cousin, swearing she will never forget what House Claudio has done. Deeply unsettled by the burning, unyielding hatred in the princess's eyes, the new saintess frantically orders her knights to just pour the poison down her throat already. Heavy boots cruelly pin her to the filthy stone floor as the guards violently force the toxic liquid past her lips. Medea knows her naive, foolish mistakes cannot be atoned for, not even in death. But as the lethal venom burns through her veins, a terrifying, unbreakable oath takes root. Coughing up dark blood onto the freezing ground, she silently condemns Jason and the treacherous family that destroyed her life. Even if it takes 1,000 lifetimes, she swears she will return to hunt down every last one of these animals. No one will ever escape her vengeance. The saintess smiles in absolute sadistic triumph, casually turning her back on the dying princess. Medea's vision slowly fades into a cold, eternal darkness, her final, labored breath promising to pave her future path entirely with the brilliant crimson of their blood. But the darkness doesn't last forever. Medea suddenly gasps, her eyes snapping open to the bright, warm sunlight of her old royal bedchamber. Verna, the very maid who betrayed her little girl, politely asks how she likes her new tiara. Staring into the mirror, a pristine, unscarred face stares back. The hunt has just begun. Waking up, she fully expects the agonizing pain of a body reduced to a tattered wreck. Instead, a strange, overwhelming lightness washes over her. She simply stares at her flawless skin. Every single scar she suffered during her brutal, bloody expeditions has completely vanished without a trace. Staring into the ornate vanity mirror, the reflection looking back isn't a haggard prisoner at death's door. It is a radiant young woman. The opulent room around her is simply too vivid to be some cruel illusion of hell. Did she actually manage to return to her youth? Sounds like a miracle, right? A desperate, terrifying thought suddenly shatters her initial shock. She whips around to face her bewildered, demanding to know the truth. Where is Peleus? Is he alive? The terrified servants exchange worried glances, stammering that Her Highness must be suffering severe after-effects from a recent fall. They gently assure her that, of course, His Majesty the King is perfectly fine. The sheer weight of those words washes over her in a wave of profound, breathless relief. He is still alive. Before the maids can even process her reaction, she abruptly shoves herself up from the chair. She urgently declares that she needs to go see him right this second. The servants immediately protest, reminding her that the king is currently away from the palace. He is on the battlefield. That single word makes her freeze, making her realize the devastating conquest hasn't even ended yet. Fearing their mistress has lost her mind from a nasty head injury, the maids frantically scramble to summon the royal physician, but she shuts them down with a single, unyielding command. Medical help doesn't matter right now. She absolutely refuses to rest until she confirms her second chance with her own eyes. Ignoring her servants' desperate pleas, Medea immediately sprints down the grand palace halls and descends the spiraling stone staircases hidden deep beneath Valdina. Her frantic footsteps echo through the cold darkness. She has to know for sure. At the very bottom lies a massive set of sealed doors, guarding a secret sanctuary accessible only to their royal bloodline. Her shaking fingers reach for the heavy iron handle. A haunting memory of her previous life flashes through her mind. She remembers kneeling in the ruins of their fallen kingdom, weeping in agony because she had foolishly given away their most sacred relic. Yet even as their world burned, Peleus didn't blame her. He just gently stroked her hair, begging his beloved sister to survive and find happiness. But that tragic end hasn't happened yet. Forcing herself to take a deep, grounding breath, she pushes the heavy doors open. Since her brother is still alive fighting on the battlefield, the kingdom's ultimate treasure must still be safe. Stepping into the shadowy chamber, a brilliant, piercing blue light washes over her face. The sage's eye is exactly where it belongs, floating perfectly intact above its ornate pedestal. Overcome by the sheer weight of her second chance, she drops to her knees on the cold floor. A fierce, defiant spark of hope ignites in her chest. As long as she protects the crystal this time, she can save her brother from his gruesome fate. The beautiful sight is quickly poisoned by bitter memories. She vividly recalls the deceptive relatives who once manipulated her tender heart. They shamelessly whined about Archduke Jason's suffering, begging her to lend them the artifact like a common trinket. If it were up to me, I wouldn't trust those snakes for a second. She vividly remembers the sickeningly sweet lies her deceitful relatives used to poison her mind. They relentlessly preyed on her fragile heart, insisting that handing the sage's eye to Archduke Jason was the absolute only way to ensure her child wouldn't grow up fatherless. But the stolen relic was immediately shattered to pieces at the border, and their hollow promises of peace only brought endless war. That single naive mistake ultimately led to her beloved brother bleeding out on a wretched, mud-soaked battlefield. A dark, bitter chuckle escapes her lips, quickly building into a manic, tearful laugh that echoes through the empty sanctuary. Pressing her trembling hands to the cold floor, she bows deeply before the altar, offering a fervent prayer of gratitude to the protective spirits of Valdina. They actually answered her dying wish. As she rises, a cold, ruthless determination completely hardens her glowing eyes. She absolutely refuses to be their pathetic, easily manipulated puppet ever again. Striding purposefully down the sunlit corridors, she carefully calculates her new timeline. She just suffered that nasty riding accident, which means she is currently 17 years old. During that chaotic tea party, her fiercely loyal maid, Beryl, threw herself directly into harm's way to break her fall. In her past life, Beryl abruptly abandoned her, supposedly claiming she would rather die than serve a washed-up royal. If you ask me, that excuse always sounded like a complete lie. Gazing out the grand windows, Medea knows the truth. That steadfast girl wouldn't just vanish without a single word. Suddenly, a hushed whisper from down the hall makes her freeze in her tracks. Two passing servants are gossiping that Jenna, the cruel headmaid, is currently tearing into one of her girls. Is history already repeating itself? The passing servants whisper that the cruel headmaid is using the recent riding accident as a convenient excuse. She intends to permanently get rid of the oddballs a knight who just saved the princess. Suddenly, Medea steps out of the quiet shadows, startling the gossiping maids into absolute, breathless silence. She intensely demands to know exactly where Beryl is being punished. Clenching her fists, the dark truth finally clicks into place. Her manipulative uncle must have orchestrated this horrific abuse to deliberately isolate her from her only true ally. Well, history ends here. She fiercely orders the terrified maids to lead the way immediately. They quickly hurry through the palace and arrive at a secluded, dusty storage room. Just then, the sickening, sharp crack of a leather whip violently echoes into the quiet hallway. Pushing the heavy wooden door wide open, Medea silently steps onto the threshold, taking in the horrific scene unfolding inside. The vicious headmaid, Jenna, wields a heavy leather crop over a severely battered and bleeding Beryl. She ruthlessly lashes the kneeling girl, absolutely furious that the fiercely loyal servant refuses to utter a single word of submission. Jenna haughtily sneers that the stubborn knight is only suffering because she foolishly chose the wrong royal master. If you ask me, that hag is the one making a fatal mistake. Just as Jenna aggressively raises her arm for another brutal strike, Medea's hand clamps fiercely onto the raised weapon. Medea glares at the stammering abuser with chilling, regal disgust. Beryl stares up at her radiant mistress in utter disbelief. How is Her Highness even standing? Without a single word, the newly awakened princess violently yanks the whip away. The heavy handle snaps back, slashing directly across Jenna's arrogant face. Clutching her bruised cheek, the arrogant headmaid shrieks in outrage, completely bewildered by the sudden retaliation. Medea doesn't even flinch. She steps forward, demanding to know who authorized this brutal punishment without her express royal permission. Instead of begging for mercy, Jenna haughtily lifts her chin and dares to reprimand the princess for interfering. Who does she think she is dealing with? As Medea's eyes narrow into a lethal glare, this abusive power trip permanently ends. The princess steps into the room, her eyes hardening as she questions the meaning of this disgraceful scene. Standing over her battered maid, Neril, is none other than headmaid Cuisine. She looks as though she's been waiting for this. This is the wicked woman who deliberately branded her a profligate. Placed in power by her uncle to control the inner palace, Cuisine is completely desperate to isolate the young royal by any means necessary. A classic power play, isn't it? Feigning sweet concern, The older woman tries to brush the confrontation aside. She suggests the princess is much too frail from her recent sickbed to handle such ugly senators, immediately ordering the remaining staff to escort her back. She isn't backing down today. Standing tall, her voice cuts through the heavy tension as she demands to know since when the royal family became so lawless. Flogging a servant without a fair trial is completely unacceptable. Clutching her chest in mock hurt, Cuisine insists the brutal beating is actually quite lenient. She blames Neryl's negligence for the princess's recent injuries, adding with a condescending smirk that she was merely fulfilling her duties for the Valdina family. The princess calmly halts the guards, noting aloud how strange that specific phrasing sounds. Flustered by the pushback, the head maid hurriedly defends herself, declaring that to serve the Valdina name is to serve His Majesty the King. With a chilling, knowing smile, she springs her trap. Between the Queen Dowager, Duke Claudio, and the rest of the noble bloodline, her previous phrasing raises a vital question. Is her loyalty truly directed solely toward the king? The surrounding servants begin to whisper anxiously among themselves. Why on earth is the head maid hesitating over such a basic question? Cuisine breaks into a panicked cold sweat, realizing she's been perfectly cornered. She knows her uncle, the Prince Regent, likely has spies hidden among the staff, making any slip-up incredibly dangerous. Forced into a corner, she slams her hands against a crate and loudly declares that King Pelias is her one, an absolute master. The princess's calm, victorious smile remains unbroken. She has this wicked woman exactly where she wants her. Sounds like a total checkmate, right? The trap snaps shut. If her loyalty truly lies with the king, the royal demands to know why she is viciously brutalizing the very maid His Majesty personally assigned to protect her. Her green eyes turn icy. Can Cuisine swear on that precious loyalty that Neryl actually caused the accident? Seething at being reprimanded by a girl she views as pathetic, the older woman decides to drop the polite facade altogether. With a deeply arrogant smirk, she cruelly reminds the young royal of her fragile standing in the palace. She isn't the master here, she's just a mere blood relative. I honestly want to wipe that smug look right off her face. Taking her insubordination a cruel step further, Cuisine twists the knife by bringing up the late king's funeral. She openly weaponizes the Queen Dowager's agonizing cries, loudly blaming the princess for the tragic death that broke their kingdom. Cuisine ruthlessly dredges up the past, weaponizing the kingdom's grief. She reminds the young royal of the agonizing day the entire nation wept, bitterly declaring that if it weren't for her, the late royal couple would still be alive today. The head maid uses that tragedy to justify her cruelty. She mercilessly mocks the girl's isolated status, pointing out that both the Queen Dowager and King Pelias clearly despise her. Why else would the king abandon her at the palace immediately after his coronation? Dismissing the royal entirely, Cuisine barks at her staff to resume the brutal beating, but instead of shrinking back into a trembling victim, the princess lets out a dark, hollow laugh that halts the entire room. Stepping past her battered maid, she smoothly snatches the wooden rod right out of the servant's hand. With an icy calm, she commands the shocked head maid to come forward and lift her skirt, casually agreeing to drop the matter regarding Neryl. Instead, the royal promises a brand new spectacle. If Cuisine insists on violently disciplining the staff, then the princess will take it upon herself to personally discipline the head maid. Cuisine completely underestimated her. How could a mere princess possibly claim the authority to strike the highest-ranking servant? The young royal is already 2 steps ahead of that objection. Holding up a heavy signet ring for everyone to see, she declares that in the king's absence, absolute power belongs solely to his designated representative. The princess proudly displays the royal seal left by her late brother. Cuisine stammers in absolute denial, claiming ignorance. The young royal coldly reminds her of the kingdom's strict wartime laws. During the late king's absence on the battlefield, the Prince Regent invoked this exact clause to mercilessly punish the entire household. Smiling sweetly, she mocks the older woman's blatant ignorance. With a sharp, authoritative tone, she commands Cuisine to lift her skirt immediately. The head maid erupts in sheer outrage, desperately refusing to accept this sudden shift in their dynamic. Trying to maintain control, Cuisine blindly barks at a subordinate to resume whipping Neryl. She arrogantly assumes this fragile girl lacks the courage to actually swing the weapon. She thinks defying her will only ruin the royal's future. She is completely wrong. The heavy wooden rod comes crashing down without a single ounce of hesitation. Cuisine crumples to the floor with an agonizing scream. Looming over the shaking woman, the princess coldly orders her back to her feet. They have only just begun. Leaving the brutal confrontation behind, the young royal gently supports her battered maid through the grand sunlit corridors. Bloodied and exhausted, Neril struggles to comprehend why her mistress would invite such dangerous hostility. The princess offers her shoulder, telling the injured girl to lean on her, but the loyal servant remains deeply terrified. She warns that the vindictive head maid holds the inner palace in an iron grip. Even now, Neril insists she must go back and beg for forgiveness. Neril tearfully apologizes, still expecting to be discarded for her failure. The princess breaks down, finally realizing the horrific truth she ignored in her past life. Her loyal maid didn't just abandon her, she was brutally beaten to death trying to protect her. As a former knight, Neril could have easily fought back, but she willingly took those agonizing hits to keep her mistress safe. The young royal gently cradles the maid's bruised face, overwhelmed by the profound realization that King Peleus secretly placed Neril here to cherish and guard her. Pulling the battered girl into a fierce, desperate embrace, the princess lets her tears fall freely. She makes a solemn, unbreakable vow: this devastating tragedy will never happen again. She will fiercely protect the few people who truly love her. The next day, news of the shocking confrontation explodes far beyond the palace walls. In the bustling second district of the capital, an energetic subordinate bursts into his superior's office. He eagerly reports that the frail royal just beat the terrifying headmaid with a disciplinary rod. The mysterious dark-haired man pieces the political puzzle together perfectly. Since Neril was a pupil of the royal guard captain, she was a massive eyesore to the scheming prince regent. As his informant laughs about the brutal one-hit knockout, the man turns away from the window with a curious, intense gaze. Was there always a princess in Valdina? Staring out the sunlit window, Cesare asks his aides a simple question. Was there a princess in Valdina? The man nods, eagerly recounting a tragic tale from 10 years ago, that you supposedly can't hear without shedding a tear. He claims the current king's younger sister is cursed, whispered to have devoured her own parents. It's a classic, heartbreaking misunderstanding. The late king and queen had practically won their war, but their soft hearts made them rush back when their lonely daughter wrote to them. Tragically, assassins slaughtered them on the road. The war was instantly lost, and the queen dowager viciously turned on the 7-year-old child. The whole country blamed their ruin on this so-called cursed princess. He scoffs, a dark mocking smirk pulling at his lips. Making a massive fuss over one little kid? Those blind idiots. Honestly, I love a man who sees straight through the royal gossip. He casts a sharp glance over his shoulder at his flustered subordinate. They've never even seen a real curse, yet they talk so much. Turning back to the glass, he tightly clenches his trembling fingers into a fist, trying to suppress the tremors. It has already been 3 long years, 3 grueling years since he began suffering from the horrifying reality of a petrification curse. True to the twisted fanatics who worshipped an evil god, the hex cast upon him was straight out of hell. Cornered and kneeling with swords crossed at his throat, the cultist screamed out a final, venomous prayer. He swore the primordial darkness would never forgive Cesare, no matter how bright his ambition shone. The fanatic's blood-curdling shriek promises that Cesare's blood will grow cold, and his heart will harden into black stone. His loyal knights cry out in sheer terror as foul. Creeping shadows erupt from the dying cultist, violently twisting up Cesare's blade and engulfing his sight. The fanatic's haunting curse still echoes in his mind, but Cesare merely flexes his gloved hand, ruthlessly forcing the dark memories down. He glances out the window, bluntly calling this ruined, disorganized country completely pathetic. His aide casually leans against the desk, far more interested in the local gossip. He cheerfully suggests they keep an eye on the royal palace. Now that the infamous princess has finally awakened, Cesare cuts through the useless chatter with a dangerously calm smile. Since his subordinate is so relaxed, he assumes the man has finally located the elusive, extinct shaman who can break his petrification curse. Sweating bullets, the aide nervously stammers that the trail went completely cold at the border. Cesare smoothly draws a silver dagger, his patience snapping. Trapped by his boss's terrifying reflecting off the deadly steel, the frantic aide swears on his life that he'll scour every inch of the royal castle. Before making a desperate tactical retreat toward the door, he stops. He nervously reminds Cesare of a crucial upcoming event. They are entering the palace this week, and he absolutely cannot forget his disguise. Staring down at the intricate silver half-mask in his hand, Cesare as a foreign titan's, his identity an absolute secret in this volatile territory, but his aide just can't resist one last teasing jab. He loudly jokes that Cesare is just grumpy because he hates hiding his top-tier looks. Honestly, if he doesn't want her, I do. The door barely clicks shut before a silver blade violently embeds itself deep into the heavy wood. It strikes right where the fleeing man's head had been a fraction of a second before. He really talks too damn much. Meanwhile, far from the shadows of Cesare's temporary study, a heavy door creaks open. A solitary figure slips quietly into a lavishly decorated parlor. Hidden beneath the heavy folds of a dark traveling cloak, the supposedly cursed princess takes her first careful steps into the unknown. Shedding her heavy, dark traveling cloak, the princess finally reveals her striking silver hair to the empty room. She slowly approaches the lavish bed, gazing down at the badly injured, heavily bandaged woman resting against the silk pillows. A deep wave of profound relief washes over her tired green eyes. At least her loyal knight's bones aren't completely shattered. Once she recovers, she'll still be able to proudly wield the heavy sword she loves so dearly. Staring softly out the tall, sunlit window, she makes a silent, unwavering vow. This fierce knight was the very first person she found in this incredibly hostile palace, and she remains her only true ally. To protect her, she has no choice. She must ruthlessly purge this entire treacherous royal household. Sounds simple, right? Before she can even begin plotting her grand sweep, aggressively loud footsteps echo down the corridor. A fiercely isking, red-haired woman violently bursts through the heavy double doors, furiously demanding to know what on earth she did wrong to deserve such mistreatment. The princess turns with cold, unbothered grace, immediately identifying her very first target for removal, her incredibly insubordinate headmaid, Mariu. Stomping her feet, the arrogant servant loudly whines about being unfairly slapped across the face by the kitchen staff just for relaying orders. She practically screams that her luxurious quarters were swapped with a lowly guard's, pointing an accusing finger right at the sleeping knight. Unfazed, the princess simply stares at the bright red handprint, stinging Mariu's cheek. "That must hurt," she replies dryly, casually advising the frantic maid to apply some soothing medicine. The sudden, icy calm leaves the hot-headed maid completely stunned. She freezes in place as the supposedly cursed royal takes a slow, deliberate step forward. Tilting her head, the princess offers to personally rub the ointment in for her. I absolutely love watching a bully panic. Her thinly veiled threat makes the terrified maid stammer in rapid retreat. Speaking with icy clarity, the princess systematically dismantles the maid's arrogant delusions. She reminds Mariu that her constant insolence was only tolerated because she foolishly believed they were close confidants. "I forgave it all," the princess states coldly, her piercing green eyes locking onto her treacherous servant. "Right up until the day the rebellion broke out and you sold me to the rebels." Desperately trying to deflect the accusation, Mariu points at the injured knight and whines about her stolen quarters. The princess simply stares her down, questioning if she really needs a traitor's approval to care for her own people. She highlights the bitter irony of Mariu trading a royal life for a fancy title, only to throw a pathetic tantrum over a room change. Deciding she has wasted enough breath, the princess casually strips the flustered servant of all her duties. This casual dismissal completely shatters Mariu's fragile ego. Clenching her fists into her skirts, the enraged maid shakes with pure spite. How dare this half-blooded, wandering dancer's daughter look down on her after years of groveling? As the silver-haired royal turns her back with quiet grace, Mariu's volatile temper violently boils over. Screaming for her to wait, the furious maid lunges forward with outstretched claws. Honestly, she really should have just walked away. A sharp scrape of steel instantly freezes the frantic maid in her tracks. Mariu shrieks in sheer terror as a heavy, gleaming sword comes to a dead stop mere inches from her throat. Despite her heavy bandages, the fiercely loyal knight has dragged herself upright to defend her master. With her green eyes burning with lethal intent, she delivers a deadly promise. "Step away from her highness, next will be your neck." Mariu shrieks in outrage at the defiance, but her venomous words are instantly cut short by cold steel pressing her throat. A thin blood spills down her neck as Neril glares down at her. The wounded warrior doesn't hesitate for a second, vowing to break every finger on Mariu's hands if she dares lay another hand on her highness without permission. Terrified by that raw, unflinching killing intent, the abusive servant scrambles backward on trembling legs. She collapses heavily onto the floor, clutching her bleeding chin in absolute shock. In just one decisive moment, the brutal hierarchy of the palace has been completely rewritten. The princess gently asks if her fiercely loyal protector needs to rest her injured arm, but Neril brushes it off as nothing. Beneath those bandages lies a physique forged like steel, harboring the strength to easily rival a high-ranking knight. Recognizing this unbreakable dedication, the princess officially appoints Neril as her personal, full-time attendant. Now it's time to set the rest of the household straight. She orders every maid to assemble immediately. Staring down the nervous rows of assembled staff, the princess completely reassigns their duties. She publicly strips the disgraced Mariu of her status, handing the intimate tasks of handling her dresses and grooming to two wide-eyed replacements. The chosen maids can hardly contain their whispered excitement. Honestly, who wouldn't be thrilled to watch the local bully fall? But taking a stand immediately triggers a nasty backlash. Several maids step forward, nervously reporting that the palace supply officer is already retaliating against them. He's deliberately issuing only soaked, rotting firewood to their quarters, and has strictly forbidden any regular staff from coming anywhere near their wing. The princess lets out a tired sigh, realizing that the head maid she scolded yesterday is pulling the strings of this petty revenge. In the shadows, frantic whispers ripple through the trembling servants. A terrifying rumor has begun to take root. Did their quiet, overlooked princess actually strike Madame Cuisine with a cane? The princess isn't about to let the head maid's petty supply embargo break their spirits. Calling her new attendants into her room, she calmly opens a heavy chest brimming with dazzling gems and distributes the treasure among the terrified girls. She openly apologizes that they have to suffer such venomous retaliation because of her, but vows she won't yield to a tyrant. She refuses to let her own people be treated like disposable pawns. She gently asks them to endure the cold and damp just a little longer, promising to officially call upon her uncle's immense power when the time is right. Deeply moved by this unprecedented sincerity from royalty, the maids tearfully pledge their absolute, unwavering devotion. Honestly, I love seeing these girls finally get a mistress who actually cares about their lives. But once they are alone, Neril voices her blunt skepticism. She warns that those chatty maids will simply fence the treasure and run the moment they leave the palace grounds. The princess, however, just flashes a cold, calculating smile. That is exactly the outcome she is counting on. Every single piece in that gaudy chest was a strategic gift from her supposedly loving uncle. For years, that man deliberately showered her with massive, tacky stones, carefully manipulating the entire public into viewing her as a spoiled, wildly extravagant fool. Now, she is flipping the board on him. Quietly sipping her dark tea, she asks Neril if she isn't curious to see how frantically her uncle will try to suppress the impending fallout. A few cheap trinkets are a small price to pay for ruin. The strategy works flawlessly. Within a few short days, the capital's markets are suddenly flooded with royal jewelry, all fenced by the palace's own disgraced staff. Frantic, scandalous whispers immediately ignite across the realm. Why on earth is their noble, beloved princess being forced to pawn her precious belongings just to placate her own abusive servants? The princess's trap snaps shut beautifully. As the head maid continues her petty harassment, the newly enriched maids eagerly spread horrific, exaggerated tales of daily abuse to anyone who will listen. In mere days, the supposedly honorable royal court is absolutely drowning in scandalous whispers. Across the capital, a cheerful informant bursts in to report this juicy gossip to his enigmatic, dark-haired boss. He breathlessly relays wild rumors of sand deliberately mixed into her food and insect-attracting scents rubbed into her sheets. The subordinate is utterly convinced the young royal is just a helpless, trapped victim. The blonde spy pities her, mocking how she was forced to pawn off the Regent Duke's extravagant gifts to beg for basic loyalty from her own servants. Sounds like a tragic downfall, right? But as he casually lists the specific tacky gems hitting the black market, his sharp-eyed boss immediately catches the brilliant discrepancy. Staring thoughtfully at their ongoing chess match, the nobleman doesn't buy the pathetic victim narrative for a single second. While his informant laughs at her supposed stupidity, the boss realizes those jewels weren't a desperate bribe. What if there was a far more calculated, vicious purpose behind flooding the black market? He smoothly captures a piece on the board, outlining her brilliant strategy for a ruthless promotion to queen. He notes that sometimes the weakest pawn can suddenly rise up and devour the entire board without warning. I have to agree, underestimating a quiet girl with nothing to lose is a fatal mistake. Rolling a captured white pawn between his fingers, A thrilled, genuinely dangerous smile spreads across the nobleman's face. He wonders just what she will become, and who she plans to destroy first. If she really is flipping the board on her abusers, he finds this little princess utterly fascinating. Back at the palace, the princess's brilliant trap is already springing into violent action. The newly enriched maids are abruptly dragged out into the courtyard, their pockets likely still heavy with fenced coin. They are thrown to the hard stone, bound tightly in thick ropes. A strict senior servant steps forward, violently stripping them of their positions. To save her own skin from the exploding scandal, the head maid is ruthlessly throwing these girls under the carriage. She publicly accuses them of being the sole tormentors, claiming they framed the higher-ups. The tied-up girls scream in absolute terror, desperately insisting they were just following orders. They thrash against their bindings, screaming for the princess to save them. After all, they just swore eternal loyalty to her, right? But as the royal steps into the courtyard, their desperate hopes shatter. The senior servant bows, playing the sick role of a loyal savior. She announces that these insolent traitors will be executed for driving a wedge between the princess and the staff. Does the quiet royal try to intervene? Not a chance. She simply smiles, thanking the woman for her trouble. The head maid even supplies 3 brand new, supposedly untainted servants to replace the condemned girls. The princess accepts them with a calculating smirk. Turning to her terrified new staff, she coldly warns them that any disloyalty will end with them dying like dogs. I have to admit, watching her ruthlessly play this game is incredibly satisfying. As she turns away, the princess leaves the senior servant completely paralyzed with a final chilling message. She tells her to warmly thank the head maid. By executing the old abusive staff to cover up the scandal, the tyrant just did the princess's dirty work for her. Her hands are finally free for the next move. Watching the radiant princess glide away with her new attendants, the senior servant finally understands the terrifying truth. This quiet, overlooked girl just flawlessly manipulated the entire palace into submission. Looking out over the sunlit palace grounds, Medea seems perfectly calm, like a girl simply enjoying the morning view. But the sudden, violent shift in the palace hierarchy has her maid, Neril, thoroughly shaken. Approaching the window with nervous steps, Neril finally asks the question burning in her mind. Did Medea actually anticipate that the head maid would make such a reckless move? Medea doesn't even blink as she turns to confirm it. Her plan was beautifully simple. By suddenly purging the spies planted in her palace, she's forced the surrounding nobles to become incredibly wary of her uncle. In return, her uncle will blindly suspect his rivals, turning his wrath toward the head maid. If you ask me, they all deserve exactly what's coming to them. Neril swallows hard as the terrifying truth sinks in. The princess is deliberately engineering a bloodbath among her own enemies. Staring at the poised young woman in front of her, Neril admits that this is completely different from the naive princess she once knew. Medea smiles softly, though her eyes remain cold as she completely agrees. The old Medea is dead and gone. After walking the edge of death once, she explains quietly, I realized you cannot remain foolish forever. Her gaze sharpens, locking onto her loyal servant. Medea asks bluntly if Neril dislikes serving such a ruthless, calculating master. The heavy question hangs in the golden light of the room. Looking at her, Neril remembers the sweet, fragile innocence the princess used to carry. It was a pure, gentle light that stood out against the palace's dark authority, something Neril had secretly sworn to protect. But they both know that innocence is exactly what gets you killed in this life. Closing her eyes, Neril lets go of the past and sinks to her knees. She bows her head in absolute reverence, making a brand new vow. No matter what kind of person your highness becomes, I will stay by your side. With a gentle, lingering touch to Neril's head, Medea softly accepts her servant's new vow. Having fought this exact political war to the bitter end in her previous life, the princess knows precisely how her uncle and the head maid operate. She can predict their every calculated move. But the one thing that keeps her constantly on edge is the unpredictable. The new variables she never encountered before her regression. Later that afternoon, a nervous red-haired maid accidentally shatters a teacup on the floor. Desperate to avoid the fate of the recently purged spies, she scrambles to make amends. She quickly returns with a fresh pot of dark berry tea, overly eager to please. She proudly announces that she brewed it exactly how Medea likes it, slightly cooled. But as the dark, thick liquid sloshes in the porcelain cup, the princess's eyes widen as a chilling sense of dread washes over her. Turning away, Medea firmly refuses the drink, claiming she simply isn't in the mood. But the naive maid refuses to take no for an answer. Pushing the cup dangerously close, she playfully whines about how she soaked her knees picking the fresh berries at dawn. If she wants to survive in this palace, she really needs to learn how to read the room. The servant's pushy voice warps in Medea's ears, dragging her violently back to a deeply buried trauma. The dark brew forces her to relive a horrific moment from her past life. Ruthless executioners poured poison down her screaming mother's throat while she could only watch. Enough. Snapping back to reality, Medea violently slaps the cup away, sending the dark liquid splashing wildly across the room. Her previous calm completely shatters. Glaring at the terrified servant, the princess demands to know why her direct refusal was ignored, leaving the trembling girl stammering out a desperate apology. Taking a shaky breath, Medea ruthlessly shoves the horrific memories back into the darkest corners of her mind. She refuses to let the trauma break her a second time. Her voice drops to an absolute, icy calm as she glares at the spilled tea, ordering the sobbing, pleading maid to be dragged out of her sight immediately. When Neril bursts into the room, panicked by the shattered porcelain and the heavy atmosphere, the exhausted princess simply slumps into her chair. She quietly waves her loyal servant's concern away, claiming it was nothing but a minor headache. The immediate storm has passed, but the true danger is just beginning. Once the mess is cleared and they are finally alone, Medea turns to Neril with a chilling new directive. She orders her confidante to keep a very close eye on the terrified servant. During their struggle, Medea's sharp eye spotted a striking trumpet flower bracelet resting on Mariu's wrist. It is an exquisite, thorny piece of jewelry legally permitted only to a select few members of the Kazan imperial family. A lowly maid couldn't possibly afford such a restricted royal artifact. Who gave it to her? The clumsy girl isn't just bad at reading the room. She is a planted spy. But rather than dragging her to the executioner's block, the calculating princess decides to let the trap play out. If her unseen enemies want to use this naive girl, Medea is more than happy to use her as bait. Honestly, I almost feel bad for whoever sent. That very night, Medea's brilliant deduction is entirely confirmed. Cloaked and completely unaware that she's being followed, Mariu slips past the palace gates and hurries down the quiet cobblestone streets of the lower town. She stops at a secluded building, anxiously glancing around before knocking on the heavy wooden door. When a tall, silver-haired man finally answers, the maid's fearful expression instantly melts into a bright, breathless smile as she lovingly whispers his name. The silver-haired man waiting in the shadows is none other than young Duke Saemon Claudio. Throwing her arms around him, Mariu desperately tries to explain the sudden, chaotic shift in the royal palace. She admits that Medea unexpectedly pushed her aside during the recent maid replacement. Saemon's welcoming demeanor instantly shifts. Towering over the trembling girl, he coldly demands to know exactly what she means. Mariu frantically stammers out an excuse about the headmaid's potential retaliation. Desperate to keep his favor, the foolish spy insists that the princess still deeply cherishes and relies on her. But Saemon is already losing his patience. The sudden political uproar surrounding Medea is giving him a massive headache. Grabbing Mariu roughly by the hair, the young duke drops his gentle facade entirely. He harshly reminds her that her only value is her close proximity to his royal cousin. If she wants a nobleman to marry a lowly commoner, she needs to prove her worth. Doesn't his blatant cruelty just make your blood boil? Terrified of losing the man she loves, Mariu immediately submits to the abuse. She frantically promises to track the princess's every single move. Pleased by her blind obedience, Saemon's icy demeanor softens as he gently strokes her hair. He pulls her into a tight embrace, whispering sweet, utterly hollow words of love. As their lips meet in the dim room, Mariu blindly accepts the toxic affection. The royal trumpet flower bracelet tightly binds her wrist like a glittering chain. Completely trapped in his manipulative web, the naive maid vows she would do absolutely anything for him. She has no idea she is merely a disposable pawn in his impending war against Medea. Neril bows low in the moonlit hall, delivering the exact news she expected all along. Mariu has been enjoying secret meetings with the young Duke of Claudio. The shockingly expensive bracelet she flaunts practically proves their treasonous collusion with the Kazan Empire. For now, she just watches and waits. There is a far more pressing matter. She asks for the current location of Neril's master, Marquis Giliphos. Learning he is staying at a small residence outside the royal castle, she immediately declares her intent to meet him. Valdina still needs his strength. The Claudio family's dark correspondence with the Kazan Empire runs far deeper than anyone suspects. Her greedy uncle has absolutely no idea she already knows about his private affairs. That simple bracelet given to buy Mariu's favor, it is the perfect, damning evidence to hang them all. Right now, her brother King Pelias is away leading a military campaign just to escape the Empire's suffocating grasp. Her uncle sees this absence as the perfect opportunity to usurp the throne. Neril is absolutely horrified. Duke Claudio is actively preparing a full-blown rebellion. She lowers her gaze, haunted by memories of a timeline only she remembers. To both the Empire and her uncle, her beloved brother is a common enemy. In her previous life, a devastatingly harsh winter struck Valdina. The Kazan Empire promised desperate food aid, only to cruelly withdraw it. Starving and freezing, the citizens turned their helpless rage toward King Pelias. A violent rebellion tore the kingdom apart, but it was entirely fabricated. Fake insurgents were deliberately planted by the Claudio family to ruin her brother. If they think they can pull that off again, they are dead wrong. Neril grips his sword in outrage, furious that a foreign power would dare plot against a sovereign king without fearing the inevitable backlash. A dark, terrifying resolve settles over her features. This time, she will stop their treacherous scheme before a single drop of royal blood is spilled. She instructs Neril to secretly bring the former royal guard captain, Marquis Gilifos, to her immediately. If anyone can help secure her brother's throne against this impending treason, it's the legendary hero of the nation. He is the only man she trusts to stand against the Empire's shadow. Gazing out the moonlit window, her resolve hardens into absolute ice. I will ensure those wretches never make it over that wall alive. In this life, she will personally orchestrate their ruin before they can even draw their swords. This time, they bleed. The very next day brings the traitors straight to her doorstep at the royal estate. Sitting in her grand parlor, she offers a polite, perfectly calculated greeting as Duchess Catherine Claudio finally makes her long-awaited appearance. The Duchess immediately grasps her hands in a cloying display of false affection, fussing dramatically over her recent riding accident. Catherine even has the nerve to claim severe travel fatigue delayed her visit. Does she really expect her to swallow that pathetic, hollow excuse? Then the real annoyance steps through the doorway. Verna, the Duchess's daughter, sweeps into the room with an infuriatingly bright demeanor, practically demanding forgiveness for their absence. I certainly wouldn't trust that sickeningly sweet smile for a single second. Verna gushes about missing the princess so desperately that she simply had to tag along, forcing her lips into a flawless, welcoming curve. She claims she missed the girl too. But beneath the polite facade, memories of her family's brutal slaughter scream for immediate vengeance. Her hands clench her skirts in a white-knuckled grip, fighting the overwhelming urge to tear these venomous women apart limb from limb. It is not yet time to strike. Instead, she vividly pictures a dark, suffocating shadow wrapping tightly around Verna's vulnerable throat. She will smile and play the gracious, unsuspecting host while methodically tightening a lethal snare around the entire Claudio family, until you are in the utmost agony. Duchess Catherine wastes no time pressing her false concern, insisting the princess must still be suffering from her recent riding accident. To prove her supposed devotion, she proudly reveals she brought a godlike physician all the way from the hostile Kazan Empire to treat her. The princess simply stares back. Letting a foreign doctor from an enemy nation freely wander the royal palace? It is an incredibly obvious trap. Before Catherine can spin a better web, foolish Verna loudly brags about the massive chests of gold her mother spent traveling to fetch him. The princess seizes the slip instantly. You went personally, Aunt? She tilts her head, pointing out the glaring plot hole. How exactly did the Duchess cross guarded borders during an ongoing war without the Chancellor's permission? Sounds rather impossible, doesn't it? Flustered, Catherine sharply scolds her daughter and hastily backpedals. She awkwardly claims the doctor simply arrived early alongside the upcoming Kazan delegation. Reaching out with desperate hands, the Duchess tries to physically bridge the gap and salvage her crumbling facade. The princess smoothly pulls away. Smiling pleasantly, she casually mentions the royal doctor already gave her a perfectly clean bill of health. Realizing her scheme is failing, Catherine switches tactics. She dabs at imaginary tears, practically weeping that she loves the princess just like her own flesh and blood. It is a completely nauseating performance. Watching her aunt sniffle dramatically, she remembers how foolishly she once clung to those exact poisonous lies. I honestly don't know how she restrains herself from striking the woman. The Duchess demands to know why her niece is acting so distant. Rather than humor the exhausting charade any longer, the princess meets Catherine's fake distress with unyielding ice. I appreciate the sentiment, she states flatly, her voice echoing in the tense parlor. But it doesn't quite reach my heart. Verna immediately erupts in childish outrage at the blatant rejection, completely failing to realize the deadly new game they are playing. The princess presses her psychological advantage, watching Catherine feign utter confusion at the sudden hostility. The royal smoothly points out a glaring, pathetic contradiction in her lies. If her loving aunt truly cared enough to notice every minor discomfort, how did she completely miss that the palace's entire maid staff was just replaced? The Duchess scrambles to stand, reaching across the table as she desperately tries to salvage her shattered narrative. But the princess has already turned her back on the pathetic display. She reminds Catherine that the recently disgraced head maid was her closest ally. If Verna had suffered such blatant disrespect, would you remain so peacefully calm? Dropping her polite facade completely, the princess orders them to leave, carelessly tossing her handkerchief to the floor. She states coldly that she simply cannot stomach looking at their hypocritical faces for another second. It is glorious to watch. The heavy doors, firmly, leaving the furious Duchess shouting at an unyielding wooden barrier. Humiliated and completely outplayed, Catherine turns her venom straight onto her own terrified daughter, viciously snapping at Verna for running her loose mouth. Sinking back onto the plush sofa, the Duchess realizes her carefully constructed control over her royal niece is rapidly slipping away, and she blames the former head maid for ruining everything. A dangerous, obsessive darkness overtakes Catherine's features. She refuses to let the obedient royal beast she spent years grooming slip from her grasp now. To bring the rebellious princess back to heel and reassert dominance, she decides she must make a brutal example of someone. The disgraced cuisine is about to pay a terrible price. Under the cover of complete darkness, a cloaked maid steals into the silent bedroom, fumbling toward the grand wardrobe. Sweat beads heavily on her face as she silently urges herself to hurry. With trembling fingers, she pulls out a gaudy, patterned handkerchief, treating it like a venomous snake. She gags just holding the fabric, swearing she can still smell its foul owner on the threads. Clutching the damning evidence, a chilling realization washes over her. To pair the princess with a man like that, the head maid is terrifyingly ruthless. The handkerchief in her hands belongs to Count Lark Etienne. On paper, he's an esteemed hereditary noble, a man possessing immense wealth that spans 3 generations. As the powerful minister of the imperial household and the regent's right-hand man, his political influence is practically absolute. But behind closed doors, he's a greedy, loathsome pervert whose very existence leaves a trail of ruined women. I don't even want to imagine what that cloth smells like. Shoving the item deep beneath the neat linens of the princess's private wardrobe, the maid finally seals the trap. Medea is utterly finished. She smirks, vividly imagining the impending chaos. Medea will be the talk of the palace for months. Lickzinkling to that 50-year-old toad will instantly obliterate any chance the young royal has at a respectable marriage. It's a truly devastating betrayal. Especially since once upon a time, the maid and the princess had actually shared a warm, genuine bond. But palace loyalties are notoriously fragile. The terrifying head maid had cornered her in the shadows, whispering insidious poison about how Medea had already replaced her. "Do you really think I'm the only one being abandoned?" The older woman had sneered, violently twisting the ache of rejection. Even deeply stung by that supposed betrayal, the maid had hesitated. Deliberately framing royalty felt like begging for divine retribution. But the head maid knew exactly what bait to dangle. If she pulled this sinister task off perfectly, she wouldn't just survive her current miserable station. She would be officially entered into a high-ranking noble family's registry. The memory of the head maid's malicious grin echoes vividly in the traitor's mind. The older woman had dangled the ultimate prize, promising formal adoption into a high-ranking noble family. For Mariu, this isn't just about escaping a life of servitude. It's entirely about love. With a proper title, she can finally stand proudly beside her secret lover. Dropping the gaudy handkerchief into the royal drawer, Mariu violently convinces herself that Medea deserves this ruin. She desperately rationalizes that the princess discarded her first. Shutting the heavy bedroom doors, she slips away. However, she remains completely oblivious to the piercing eyes tracking her every move. From the deep shadows, a fierce gaze locks onto the departing traitor. The following morning, golden sunlight streams through the grand palace windows as the pathetic trap is instantly dismantled. A tall, imposing knight stands before the princess. Her name is Neril and her loyalty is absolute. She calmly reports that Mariu played right into their hands, moving precisely as Medea had anticipated. Medea remains perfectly composed, cloaked in quiet elegance. Neril presents the confiscated evidence, holding the patterned silk out for inspection like it's a diseased rag. Medea examines the embroidered crest with a cold, knowing look, Count Etienne. So that's the disgusting angle her enemies are trying to play. The knight is absolutely livid. The very thought of these lowly palace snakes plotting against her brilliant master makes Neril's blood boil. She steps closer, her green eyes flashing dangerously in the morning light. Your Highness, I can dispose of 2 or 3 bodies without leaving a single trace. Just give the command. Medea points out the obvious flaw. Assassinating a powerful minister would surely put Neril in fatal, but the fierce knight doesn't hesitate for a single second. Gripping her sword hilt, Neril aggressively vows that Medea is her true lord. I would gladly give my life for you. Who needs a prince when you have a bodyguard ready to bury the evidence? The head maid thought she was playing chess, but Medea is already 3 moves ahead. Medea remains completely unbothered by the sudden assassination offers. Smiling gently at the knight's violent enthusiasm, the princess steps close and places a calming hand against Neril's chest. She firmly orders her fiercely loyal guard dog to stand down. Murdering a powerful minister today is entirely unnecessary. The brilliant royal already has a far more poetic punishment in mind. Looking up into the knight's intense green eyes, Medea asks if Neril is still perfectly confident in her stealth abilities. With a cold smile, she declares, then let's use the head maid's gift against her. Later that afternoon, Medea reveals the final piece of their counterattack. She produces an expensive, glittering bracelet, an ornate item far too luxurious for a common servant. Another maid had suspiciously tried returning it, claiming Mariu had dropped it while shamelessly bragging about a secret lover. The irony is simply too delicious to ignore. Medea coldly orders Neril to wrap this precious token of love tight inside Etienne's filthy handkerchief and plant it deep into Mariu's personal belongings. If the traitor wants a ruinous scandal so desperately, she can absolutely have one. With the palace sabotage perfectly reversed, Medea pulls up her heavy traveling cloak. They have a highly classified meeting to attend at the Marquis' estate. Neril assures her that a trusted colleague is already waiting outside with a carriage, though she warns that the man is somewhat conceited. Slipping through the overgrown palace gardens at sunset, the 2 women reach a forgotten, vine-covered side gate. Waiting in the golden light is a handsome, smirking young man. Wow, I never thought I'd see royalty using this side door, he teases, exposing the knight's favorite sneaking route. Medea just stares blankly at the grinning blonde man, utterly unamused by his overly casual attitude. Honestly, if he's trying to impress her, it isn't working. Neril wasn't exaggerating in the slightest. This new guide is unbelievably arrogant. The arrogant blonde guide, Tom, casually leans against the waiting carriage in the glowing sunset, openly complaining about how long they took. His blatantly disrespectful tone instantly earns him a lethal glare from Neril. The fierce knight steps protectively in front of Medea, furiously demanding he show proper respect to the princess. Tom just smirks dismissively at the deadly threat, pushing the intensely loyal knight to grab him roughly by the collar. But Medea simply steps past the squabbling pair, calmly ordering her guard to stand down. Honestly, compared to the suffocating vitriol she endured before her regression, this boy's petty attitude is absolute child's play. Lowering her heavy traveling hood, the princess flashes a radiant, disarming smile. She gracefully introduces herself, politely asking to be in his care for the journey. Tom is completely caught off guard. His arrogant bravado evaporates, replaced by a nervous sweat as her overwhelming elegance leaves him stuttering. Guess he wasn't expecting an actual queen. With the tension perfectly diffused, Medea accepts Neril's gently offered hand and steps elegantly into the shadowed carriage interior. Casting one last composed, confident glance over her shoulder, the royal signals that they are finally ready to depart. As the unmarked carriage rolls quietly out of the capital beneath the brilliant sunset, their true destination lies clearly ahead. They are heading straight for the rural territory of Marquis Gilifos, and judging by the imposing solitary figure waiting silently by an estate window, the powerful nobleman is already expecting his royal guest. The long, arduous carriage ride through the sprawling military encampment comes to a sudden and violent halt. A stray rock catches the wheel, sending a sharp jolt through the cabin. The young driver hops into the dirt with an entirely too casual grin. He cheerfully announces that a wheel has popped off, and he'll need a moment to fix it. Inside the dim cabin, the princess's loyal companion immediately bristles at the young man's carefree attitude. Scowling, she apologizes for the delay and offers to go outside to give the brat a piece of her mind. "Leave it," the princess commands softly. Instead of indulging in petty frustrations, her delicate hand parts the heavy velvet curtains, her attention stolen by the harsh world outside. Just beyond her window, broken men litter the dusty path. Soldiers wrapped in bloodied bandages drag themselves forward on wooden crutches, their faces hollow with exhaustion. When the princess asks if these are veterans of the ongoing conflict, her maid grimly confirms it. As the war drags on without an end in sight, the casualties only multiply. Does a hollow victory justify this level of suffering? The tragedy deepens as the maid explains that while some lucky survivors can return to their families, countless others have watched their hometowns burn to ash. Now they are left permanently crippled with absolutely nowhere to go. The princess silently absorbs the devastating reality of her crumbling homeland. She holds that grief in her heart as they finally depart the camp. Their travels eventually bring them to a magnificent estate, a stark and jarring contrast to the grim suffering they just witnessed. Inside the grand library, the princess is formally greeted by Marquis Gilifos, the imposing former commander of the Valdina Royal Guard. She meets his respectful bow with a calm, practiced grace. As they sit down for tea, the gray-haired veteran warmly observes that she has grown quite a bit since their last meeting. Honestly, if anyone can help her forge a new path and save this kingdom, it's him. She smiles softly, noting that he hasn't changed a bit. Sitting across from her in the grand library, the Marquise closely observes the quiet, fragile-looking princess. Despite her calm demeanor, he privately doubts her newfound resolve. He assumes this sudden visit is just a childish reaction, figuring she only came running to him for protection after a petty squabble with her head maid. The painful memory of their bitter falling out years ago still stings. He recalls how a weeping, terrified princess had once accused him of plotting to steal her royal seal. Back then, she had foolishly swallowed every lie her manipulative uncle fed her, instantly discarding the Marquis' lifetime of loyal service without a second thought. He sighs heavily, thoroughly exhausted by the mere thought of enduring more endless court drama. Valdina has lost its luster, and he refuses to be dragged down with it. Cutting their pleasantries painfully short, the veteran leans forward and firmly states his position. He has absolutely no desire to step back into the kingdom's filthy political struggles. Unfazed by his blunt rejection, the princess smoothly slides a heavy, wax-sealed scroll onto the mahogany table. She completely catches the gruff commander off guard, warmly declaring that she isn't here to beg for his political backing at all. Instead, she wants him to oversee the construction of a massive housing district for retired soldiers. A veteran settlement built directly inside the royal castle grounds. The grizzled veteran is utterly bewildered by the sheer audacity of her plan. The princess coolly points out that he was the one who purposefully halted her carriage to make her witness the soldiers' horrific suffering. Did he really think she'd just ignore it and move on? Taking a graceful sip of her tea, she calmly admits that her eyes and ears were covered for far too long. Honestly, it's incredibly satisfying to see her finally taking control. With the crown bankrupt and greedy nobles turning a blind eye, she desperately needs a man of unshakable honor. She looks him in the eye, boldly entrusting him with the kingdom's future. The seasoned veteran narrows his eyes, completely unable to fathom why she would willingly surrender her vast private fortune for a project that yields absolutely zero profit. Placing a delicate hand over her heart, the princess simply states she is finally doing exactly what Valdina's rightful heir ought to do. Behind her unwavering gaze lies a dark, terrifying memory. She remembers the bitter, blood-soaked truth of her past life, where starving, abandoned veterans eventually turned their desperate rage against the very motherland they once bled to protect. She absolutely refuses to let her country's forgotten heroes become violent rebels just to survive a second time. While she could easily petition Chancellor Cizeo for the funding, she knows the greedy politician couldn't care less about dying men. She leans in slightly, her voice ringing with absolute certainty. She doesn't need political clout. She needs Marquis Gilifos and his sincere, unshakable devotion to the kingdom's people. A heavy, contemplative silence falls over the grand library. The old commander slowly sets down his porcelain teacup. Stroking his white beard, he stares out the sunlit window, thoroughly weighing the immense, kingdom-altering responsibility she just placed entirely on his shoulders. Later that afternoon, the carriage rattles roughly along the uneven dirt road, heading back to the capital. Unfazed by the bumpy journey, the princess peacefully reviews her newly secured blueprints with a soft, triumphant smile. Her loyal maid, however, is deep troubled by this massive financial gamble. The crown should be footing this exorbitant bill, not her lady's private coffers. Honestly, I'd be sweating over the receipts too. The princess chuckles warmly at the anxious, protective girl. Are you worried I'll end up penniless? Blushing fiercely, the devoted companion vows she would gladly work to provide for her lady if bankruptcy strikes. The princess laughs, playfully noting that a secure kingdom and a reliable caretaker sounds like a wonderful future. But beneath their light-hearted banter, the innocent joke strikes a painfully tragic chord in the young maid's fiercely loyal heart. The carriage ride continues in quiet contemplation. The princess stares blankly out the window, her detached demeanor leaving Neril deeply concerned. Does she care about her well-being at all? But there is no time to dwell on fragile feelings. Turning away from the fading sunlight, the princess softly asks if Neril handled the handkerchief and the bracelet. The loyal maid cheerfully confirms that everything was planted exactly as ordered. A cold, calculating shadow crosses the princess's delicate features as the grand royal palace comes into view. She murmurs that their carefully laid trap should be springing soon. In fact, she muses it might already be a total, chaotic mess. Back at the opulent estate, a terrifying silence suffocates the drawing room. A regal, silver-haired royal grips a peacock feather fan, demanding her servant repeat the shocking discovery made inside the princess's private bedroom. A dark-haired maid bows her head, barely hiding a venomous smile. Honestly, these palace backstabbers work fast. Feigning apology, the servant reports finding Count Etienne's personal handkerchief, slyly suggesting that a scandalous, secret romance has blossomed. Snap, the ornate feather fan shatters in two under the older woman's furious grip. How scandalous, she roars, her face twisting in utter disgust. To her, this sordid little rumor is an unforgivable blow to the royal family's absolute honor. This means war. Trembling with righteous anger, she orders her attendants to drag the princess before her this instant. Today is the day she finally destroys that wretched girl once and for all. Stepping into the dimly lit parlor, Medea offers a respectful, flawless bow to her grandmother. She anticipates a tense meeting, but the hostility is instantaneous. Instead of returning the greeting, the dowager simply glares down at her. She orders the princess straight to her knees. Medea complies gracefully, her expression entirely unreadable as she sinks to the carpet, but her silent, perfect obedience only seems to enrage the older woman further. The grandmother shrieks at the top of her lungs, demanding not just a polite kneel but a total, begging surrender. Unshaken by the screaming, Medea keeps her absolute composure. She gently asks what could have possibly provoked this sudden outrage, even feigning sweet concern for the dowager's blood pressure. It is a brilliant, subtle strike. Her grandmother practically crushes her peacock fan, utterly disgusted by Medea's innocent facade. Then, the trap is finally sprung. The furious matriarch announces that the head maid has confessed everything, claiming Medea has been secretly sneaking around with a lover. Medea's blonde caretaker freezes in sheer panic. She knows for a fact the accusation is entirely baseless, not a chance. The princess's future marriage is far too valuable of a political chess piece to risk. Her caretakers have managed her entire life like a puppet on tight strings, ensuring no unwanted suitors ever got close. So who would dare fabricate such a dangerous, high-stakes scandal? The answer steps right out from the shadows of the very same room. Two maids move forward before the dowager even issues a command. Cuisine, the cruel dark-haired servant, flashes a chilling, victorious smile. Honestly, the sheer audacity of this scheming woman is just staggering to watch. Putting on a sickeningly theatrical display of loyalty, Cuisine spins a massive, calculated lie. She claims Medea tried to violently silence her after she uncovered the secret romance. To seal the princess's fate, the treacherous maid drags forward a terrified, trembling red-haired girl named Mariu to testify. With dramatic flair, Mariu steps up and spins a massive, calculated tale. She claims she was dragged along to Medea's secret trysts entirely against her will. She even squeezes out a few crocodile tears when slaying the poor distracted servant. But despite her loud sobbing, she can't help stealing nervous, incredibly guilty glances at the unnervingly silent princess. The grandmother absolutely explodes at this so-called spectacle, the sheer volume of her screeching, making even the lying maids break into a cold sweat. As the screaming echoes through the parlor, Mariu begins to truly panic. She realizes the furious matriarch might actually lock Medea away in a remote convent forever. Did she just sign the princess's death warrant? Instead of cowering under the vicious verbal assault, Medea remains perfectly, flawlessly serene. She gently agrees to accept any harsh punishment if she is actually proven guilty. But then, with a subtle smile, she smoothly points out a rather glaring, undeniable coincidence to her furious grandmother. Both of her accusers happen to have massive personal axes to grind. Cuisine was recently disciplined for breaking royal law, and Mariu was dismissed for pure negligence. Honestly, their blatant petty grudge makes this whole setup look incredibly cheap. Medea boldly asks if such openly resentful women can truly be trusted. Sheer panic flashes across Cuisine's face as her carefully constructed plot starts to unravel. Desperate to keep the matriarch's rage focused on the princess, she violently shoves Mariu forward. Stumbling over her own feet, the terrified redhead practically shrieks about a piece of hard evidence. She claims there is a hidden handkerchief from the phantom lover. Having heard quite enough, the dowager cuts the squabbling short with an exhausted, frustrated wave of her hand. She loudly announces she's already bypassed their useless gossip and ordered a thorough search of Medea's private chambers. Right on cue, the heavy parlor doors swing open. Baroness Pinatelli, the dowager's most ruthless lady-in-waiting, steps inside to deliver the raid's results. Stepping calmly into the light, Baroness Pinatelli presents a tightly folded bundle to the expectant matriarch. The cruel maids exchange victorious smirks as the Baroness confirms she successfully recovered a man's handkerchief belonging to the minister of the royal household. It looks like the final, undeniable nail in Medea's coffin. But then, the dowager's ruthless lady-in-waiting drops an absolute bombshell. However, the place where I found the evidence was not the princess's room. Pinatelli turns her cold, calculating gaze directly toward the trembling, red-haired servant, announcing she recovered it from Mariu's quarters. The deadly trap just snapped shut. How exactly did Medea pull off this flawless reversal? Honestly, I need to take notes from this woman. Just a few days prior, she arranged a secret early morning meeting with the fierce Baroness. Instead of begging for mercy, the princess confidently extended her hand, armed with lethal political leverage. Medea knew that Pinatelli's late father, the former minister Sachin, had been falsely framed and executed by the corrupt Duke Regent. By promising to clear his tarnished name using her royal seal, the princess secured an unbreakable hidden alliance. The dowager's most loyal hunting dog had secretly switched sides. Back in the suffocating tension of the parlor, Pinatelli smoothly unfolds the scandalous handkerchief. Resting inside the expensive fabric is a delicate, thorny rose bracelet. The smug color instantly drains from the plotting maids' faces as they stare down at the damning proof, realizing how badly they've been outplayed. Without missing a single beat, the Baroness informs the furious grandmother that several servants can confirm the jewelry belongs exclusively to Mariu. Since it was carefully wrapped in the minister's personal cloth, Pinatelli innocently suggests the two of them must be the ones carrying on a secret, forbidden affair. Checkmate. Backed into a corner of her own making, Mariu completely loses her mind. Sweating profusely, the terrified girl practically screams, "That bracelet wasn't given to me by the minister." She is entirely unaware she is only digging her own grave deeper with every frantic word. Desperate to keep the narrative together, Cuisine demands to know who exactly gave her the jewelry. But Baroness Pinatelli coldly cuts off any possible excuses. She sharply points out that a lowly royal maid could never afford such a rare, expensive luxury item on her meager salary. Sweating profusely, the cornered redhead stammers that it was simply a gift from someone else. Cuisine aggressively pushes for a name, completely oblivious to her pawn's actual, paralyzing panic. Mariu realizes she is utterly trapped. Her actual is a young nobleman named Saman, and his fiercely strict mother, the Duchess, happens to be sitting right there in the parlor. If she confesses the truth now, the furious Duchess will absolutely destroy her life. Before the trembling maid can totally crack under the pressure, Medea smoothly intervenes. Smiling gently, the princess suggests that Mariu must simply be too overwhelmed and shy to confess her passionate, secret romance with the royal minister. The red-haired servant flinches in sheer horror, staring at the princess's unnervingly calm face. She finally understands the terrifying reality. Medea orchestrated this entire downfall. Still kneeling gracefully before her scowling grandmother, Medea delivers the final devastating blow wrapped in sickeningly sweet innocence. She begs the matriarch to show mercy on the deeply devoted pair. Honestly, her acting is Oscar-worthy. With a flawless, angelic smile, the princess formally requests her grandmother to graciously bless Mariu's immediate marriage to the minister. The princess calmly faces her grandmother, delivering a seemingly generous request with a perfectly straight face. Since Mariu's feelings for Count Etienne run so deep that she'd scheme behind her master's back, they should obviously be married. Sounds simple, right? Recognizing the lethal trap disguised as a blessing, the terrified maid drops to the floor. She begs for forgiveness, fully aware she's been caught. But the princess's serene smile doesn't waver for a second. Why ask for forgiveness? She playfully insists she's just being a supportive mistress, cheering on her servant's profound romance. Isn't the count the exact husband Mariu desired all along? The maid stammers in absolute horror as her own treacherous plot is spun into a noose around her neck. The mere thought of that altar drains every drop of blood from Mariu's face. Me become Etienne's wife? The reality of spending her remaining years tied to a hideous, elderly toad instead of the cousin she actually loves makes her stomach churn. If I were her, I'd probably pass out on the spot. She quickly decides she would rather die than wear that cursed wedding dress. Blind panic finally shatters her silent loyalty. Clinging pathetically to her mistress's pristine skirts, Mariu blurts out the ugly truth. It was all a fabricated setup. The head maid forced her to hide the minister's handkerchief in the royal bedchamber. Desperate to teach the princess a lesson after their recent argument, she cries out for mercy, frantic to avoid taking the fall alone. Mariu violently sobs that she was blinded by the head maid's shiny offer to be officially registered into a noble family. But before she can grovel any further, the actual mastermind bursts into the room. The furious headmaid screams over her, desperately telling Her Majesty that this cornered little wench is just spinning lies to save her own skin. The chaotic shouting match is abruptly cut off as another servant steps forward to shield her mistress. With a deadly, unwavering glare, she scolds the headmaid's sheer nerve. The lines have been drawn. She fiercely demands how a mere servant dares to try and frame their master. The true, undeniable blood of Valdina. The Queen Dowager has seen enough of this pathetic spectacle. Gripping her ornate fan with barely suppressed rage, she barks a swift order. Drag those insolent wenches away. The punishment is brutally absolute. She commands them to crush the servants' hands so they can never frame their masters again, sealing their grim fate. Thrashing violently against the armored guards, the head maid screams bloody murder. She desperately points the finger back at Medea, pleading with Lady Catherine to save her from this entirely fabricated setup. But Catherine just averts her eyes. She sweats nervously and refuses to intervene as her disposable pawn is hauled off to face a grisly, agonizing end. With the treacherous servants finally removed from the chamber, an oppressive silence falls over the room. The dowager's piercing, icy glare remains fixed solely on her own granddaughter. She coldly demands if Medea actually thinks she's innocent just because the maids took the fall. After all, rumors of the princess's wild, unacceptable behavior have already deeply stained the palace's reputation. The elderly monarch finally reveals her true, calculating objective. Condemning Medea's clumsy attempts at wielding royal authority, she ruthlessly orders her to hand over the king's seal at once. It's a blatant power grab, thinly disguised as discipline. Yet Medea remains perfectly still. She keeps her gaze firmly locked on the floor, absorbing the hostility in absolute silence. Sensing the dangerous shift in the atmosphere, Catherine immediately steps in to play the gentle peacemaker. She softly urges her mother-in-law to calm down, offering a sickly sweet defense of Medea's supposed political ignorance. The sheer hypocrisy of her fake sympathy makes my skin crawl. The dowager merely sneers at the excuse, bitterly complaining about how long she must tolerate this utterly useless child. Hovering over the silent princess, Catherine condescendingly urges Medea to just beg for forgiveness so this entire mess can quickly blow over. She doesn't utter a single word. She just kneels there on the plush carpet, completely unfazed by the blatant humiliation. Pushed to her absolute limit by this icy defiance, the dowager fiercely springs to her feet, screaming at the wicked girl for daring to ignore her elders. The dowager violently screams that Medea is trying to drive her away, exactly like her son did. But the princess breaks her stubborn silence. With infuriating calm, she reminds the furious monarch that the king personally entrusted the seal to her. While they are family behind closed doors, his royal authority reigns supreme. How could she possibly overturn His Majesty's absolute command? The dowager is struck completely speechless by this flawless, unbreakable logic. Sensing her victory, Medea immediately bows low to the floor, her dress spilling across the carpet. She politely begs her grandmother to respect the king's undeniable decree. Cornered by the very laws she claims to uphold, the elderly woman bitterly concedes. She admits she lacks the power to defy the king, but she utterly refuses to let this defiance slide. Spitefully wielding her status as a royal elder, she orders Medea to kneel before the chapel. She demands a prayer of repentance until the goddess herself sends a revelation of forgiveness. Medea accepts the grim sentence without a single hint of hesitation. Moving to the grand cathedral courtyard, she gracefully lowers herself onto the unforgiving stone. Under the punishing glare of the midday sun, she folds her hands and begins her silent, unmoving vigil. Half a day slowly drags by, drawing a massive crowd of whispering nobles to the courtyard. They openly scoff at the sheer cruelty of the dowager's impossible condition. A divine revelation? That's a miracle even the high priest struggles to witness once in a lifetime. They all know this is just a petty, fabricated excuse to torture the princess until the old woman's sour mood eventually improves. Day bleeds into a freezing, shadow-filled night, but Medea refuses to break. If that old crone wants a battle of wills, she picked the wrong girl. Alone beneath the cold moonlight, the princess's eyes finally flutter open. She glares into the darkness, fueled by a quiet, unbreakable resolve that no petty punishment will ever shatter. While the rest of the palace comfortably sleeps, Medea's loyal maid lingers in the freezing shadows, her heart breaking for her severely mistreated master. She desperately wants to intervene, but she knows Medea absolutely refuses to offer the dowager the satisfaction of a surrender. The bitter, freezing night eventually gives way to a blinding dawn, yet her pristine posture falters. She simply folds her hands tighter, radiating an almost frightening serenity under the morning sun. The brutal standoff drags out across the sprawling palace grounds, testing everyone's limits except the princess's. Watching from a high sunlit window, removes his glasses and Regressed his glass and pinches the bridge of his nose. He lets out a heavy, utterly exhausted sigh. 3 grueling days have passed since the dowager's petty decree. If I had to kneel on stone that long, my legs would have shattered by noon. Yet Medea remains rooted beside the courtyard statue, looking as unbothered as a stone carving herself. Unable to peel his eyes away from the bizarre spectacle, the silent chancellor is abruptly interrupted by a sharp, rhythmic tapping. A tall, mysterious man clad in a sleek black mask steps out from the corridor's deep shadows. With a dark, knowing smirk, the stranger casually calls out Cicier's blatant distraction. He playfully notes that suddenly changing their secret meeting location just to spy on the resilient princess is far too transparent. Who exactly is this masked man? And what business does he have with Valdina's top official? The Lord Chancellor sighs, adjusting his glasses in the dimly lit hallway. He questions why Cesare suddenly changed their meeting place, accusing him of having glaringly transparent intentions. Cesare just offers a knowing smirk. Annoyed, the Chancellor warns him not to spout absolute nonsense. Brushing the accusation off as a mere coincidence, the Chancellor steps toward his desk. Cesare isn't buying it. He points out that wild rumors about the princess are currently flooding the palace. She's been at it for 3 days straight, so surely the Chancellor must be worried. I said it was a coincidence, Cesare, the Chancellor snaps, sharply pivoting the conversation to business. He reviews a lengthy document from the Facade Trading Company. Since they exclusively deal in weapons, he doesn't know what they want in Valdina. Regardless, he offers to turn a blind eye using his authority. Cesare lets out an amused sound, a sly smile spreading beneath his silver mask. He hands over another document to seal the deal. You must want something to make such an offer. He leans in, waiting for the inevitable catch. What exactly does the Lord Chancellor want in return? Letting out a heavy sigh of relief, the Chancellor clutches the finalized agreement. His stern facade quickly melts into pure joy. With the hefty sum he just secured, he can finally manage the royal finances for a while. That certainly explains his sudden good mood. Meanwhile, Cesare approaches the grand window, looking down at the sunlit courtyard below. His mind drifts to the bizarre rumors swirling around the palace. The fragile princess of Valdina has officially caught his attention. Honestly, if he isn't curious about her scheme, I definitely am. Down in the stone courtyard, the pale princess remains collapsed on her knees. She looks as though a newborn foal would have more strength than her right now. Why endure to such a punishing extent? He wonders what exactly she's trying to draw out from her heartless grandmother. Watching her agonizing endurance, Cesare sees a striking reflection of his own dark past. He vividly remembers standing before the throne, how the emperor's tight leash only drove him to fiercely provoke the man further. He understands the fragile princess's silent, desperate strategy perfectly. The deeper the inflicted wound, the greater the pity that eventually follows. It is a brilliant, deeply dangerous game. Suddenly, a loud, obnoxious voice shatters the courtyard's tense, punishing silence. Cesare peers down from the balcony, narrowing his eyes as he instantly recognizes the portly figure causing the sudden commotion below. It is Count Larc Etienne, the powerful minister of the royal household. What does a greedy, ambitious man like him want with a fallen, disgraced princess? A loyal maid desperately tries to block the minister's path, frantically citing the Queen Dowager's strict isolation orders. But Count Etienne is completely unfazed by the royal command. He roughly shoves the terrified woman aside while his personal guards aggressively restrain her from helping. He firmly believes his high status grants him absolute access to the restricted grounds. He smugly boasts that he was almost the young princess's royal consort anyway, claiming he simply wants a closer look at his former prospect. The minister eagerly approaches the collapsed, exhausted girl. He looms over her trembling form, openly licking his lips with a vile, predatory gaze. Just looking at his awful sneer makes my skin crawl. The helpless princess can barely keep her head up after 3 grueling days of punishment. As Etienne eagerly reaches his greedy, intrusive hand out to stroke her silver hair, the rising tension hits an absolute breaking point. Someone has to step in. Without warning, a heavy stone powerfully rockets through the crisp air. The jagged rock violently strikes the back of Etienne's outstretched hand, entirely shattering the disgusting moment. The minister shrieks in sudden, high-pitched agony as fresh blood spatters the bright courtyard tiles. He clutches his bruised fingers, completely bewildered by the sudden attack. It seems our mysterious observer refuses to just sit back and watch from the shadows anymore. The obnoxious minister staggers backward, shrieking in high-pitched, utter disbelief as he desperately clutches his freshly bleeding hand. He frantically scans the pale courtyard tiles, completely bewildered by the sudden, painful attack. Who would dare strike a powerful man of his high status? His panicked guards instantly rush to his side as Etienne starts screaming at the top of his lungs about a targeted assassination attempt. The ridiculous, overly dramatic accusation quickly sends a rapid ripple of shocked whispers through gathering onlookers. Up on the safe balcony, our masked sniper calmly drops his remaining ammunition into a nearby potted plant. Startled by the echoing shrieks below, the Lord Chancellor hurries to the glass, demanding to know what on earth is happening down there. Without offering a single word of explanation, Cesare firmly pivots on his heel and strides away from the grand window. When the bewildered Chancellor stammers after him, Cesare smoothly lies that it was absolutely nothing. If you ask me, he clearly prefers keeping his sudden protective streak a secret. Almost as if sensing the shifting tension in the royal palace, dense storm clouds rapidly choke out the afternoon sun. Heavy rain begins to aggressively pound against the ancient stone courtyards and towering spires. Will the fragile princess truly stay kneeling in this freezing downpour? Far from the courtyard chaos, Cesare waits quietly in the shadows of a covered archway as the storm steadily intensifies. Suddenly, a panicked voice cuts through the noise. A breathless subordinate comes sprinting through the heavy deluge, desperately clutching a single dark umbrella for his boss. The loyal young man frantically offers the umbrella, insisting he will run to fetch a carriage so his master stays perfectly dry. When Cesare casually suggests they just walk together, his subordinate practically explodes. Gripping Cesare's hands, the man passionately declares that someone destined to take the imperial throne cannot be allowed to suffer even a single drop of rain. Leaving the dropped umbrella behind, the frantic aide sprints off into the storm to fetch a dry carriage. He abruptly leaves his master to the miserable elements. Left totally alone in the gloomy archway, Cesare simply stares at the falling deluge in quiet contemplation. Imperial Prince. Cesare whispers the heavy title, catching the freezing rain in his bare palm. It is a glorious, suffocating expectation. He tightly clenches his wet hand, his expression hardening beneath the silver mask. He knows absolute, reigning power is a throne that might actually never be his. Ignoring his subordinate's desperate fussing, Cesare steps straight out into the torrential downpour. His dark boots splash through the rising puddles as he casually retrieves the discarded umbrella. The freezing water quickly soaks his clothes, but he seems thoroughly unbothered by the sudden chill. He turns his dark gaze back toward the open plaza. Against all logical reason, the fragile girl is still out there. She remains stubbornly anchored in front of the looming statue, letting the violent storm fiercely batter her trembling body. If you ask me, that borders on sheer madness. Watching her desperate struggle, a toxic memory suddenly claws at Cesare's mind. He perfectly remembers the Emperor's vicious voice, screaming that his endless cruelty mirrored the monster who devoured his mother. How absurd, he thinks, his eyes widening. She is fighting the exact same agonizing battle against her own toxic blood. Then, her fragile endurance finally shatters. The exhausted princess sways blindly before collapsing hard onto the punishing, waterlogged tiles. Her body just gives out completely. Without a single second of hesitation, Cesare immediately breaks from the safe shadows and rushes forward into the blinding storm. In the unforgiving, torrential downpour, a masked knight halts in his tracks. A frail figure is kneeling before the grand statue in the flooded courtyard, entirely exposed to the raging storm. It is the princess, forcing her ruined body to endure a brutal public penance. Her knuckles are white against the slick cobblestones, her breathing ragged and shallow. She looks like she might shatter at any moment. A row of maids watches in utter silence, safely shielded beneath their parasols. They offer no help, they just stare. But the young woman refuses to collapse in front of them. Shivering violently and drained of all color, she grits her teeth against the freezing agony. I admire her terrifying stubbornness. She silently repeats a desperate mantra in the dark. Not yet, she tells herself, her vision blurring as the cold seeps deep into her bones. I just have to hold on a little longer. It is a battle of absolute willpower. She pits her fragile frame against the crushing weight of the endless rain. Suddenly the relentless, freezing assault stops. The princess gasps, her eyes flying open in utter disbelief. A black umbrella now rests securely over her head, shielding her from the bitter storm. Before she can even process the sudden warmth, the towering knight sweeps right past her shoulder. He doesn't linger. Stunned by this completely unexpected act of mercy, she stares helplessly at his retreating cape. Who is this man? Why would a stranger risk drawing attention just to protect her? For a fleeting second, the terrifying isolation of her punishment is broken. Walking away into the storm, the dark-haired knight pushes his soaked bangs back, a dangerously amused smirk spreading across his face. "You're putting on quite the show, princess," he murmurs to himself. His quiet admiration is abruptly cut short. A frantic blonde subordinate comes sprinting through the puddles, screaming for his boss. The sky above the grand cathedral only darkens. This grueling ordeal has dragged on for 5 torturous days, yet the princess still refuses to surrender. Down from a warm, dry balcony, an older noblewoman scowls in absolute disgust. How dare this ruined girl still hold her head high? The matriarch sneers. She is furious. The stubborn girl should have dragged herself inside to beg for forgiveness by now. High above the flooded courtyard, the matriarch's trusted attendant carefully steps forward. She watches her mistress's growing frustration and finally dares to speak her mind. The loyal maid doesn't believe the young princess is simply being defiant just to test her authority. Instead, she points out a tragic sundial left in her corner. She is completely isolated in her corner. She is completely isolated in her own home, forced to desperately defend herself against relentless, vicious slander from her own headmaid. The matriarch's sneer falters as she considers the attendant's sharp observation. It really doesn't make any logical sense. That treacherous headmaid was originally appointed by the second prince, Joaquin. If there was truly a behavioral problem with the princess, the servant should have reported directly to him. Why would she go completely out of her way to bypass her master and complain directly to the matriarch? The older woman narrows her eyes, a dark, unsettling suspicion finally taking root. Anticipating her mistress's doubts, the attendant quietly produces a thick stack of hidden ledgers. She took the liberty of investigating the headmaid's recent activities behind the scenes. The secret findings she uncovered are undeniably damning. I love a competent maid who comes prepared with receipts. The matriarch snatches the papers, her face twisting into sudden, explosive fury as she scans the hidden accounts. The vile headmaid has been systematically embezzling funds and shamelessly stealing Medea's personal belongings. When the sharp-witted princess finally noticed the missing assets, the corrupt servant panicked. She orchestrated this entire elaborate scandal to silence her. She deliberately used the matriarch's strict authority to crush the girl before she could speak out. The older woman seethes, humiliated that she was played for a fool. Just as her wrath reaches its boiling point, the heavy parlor doors are violently thrown open. A frantic servant bursts into the room, screaming in sheer panic. Down in the unforgiving, flooded courtyard, the grueling 5-day ordeal has finally taken its toll. Medea's fragile, freezing body has reached its breaking point. She lies crumpled on the slick cobblestones, utterly motionless beneath the darkening sky. The matriarch rushes out into the unforgiving downpour, absolutely horrified by the grim sight before her. She furiously screams at the surrounding maids, demanding to know how they could just stand by and watch the young woman deteriorate to this breaking point. The servants can only cower, feebly protesting that they were strictly following her orders to not offer a single drop of water. Refusing to leave the ruined girl on the flooded cobblestones, the older woman desperately gathers Medea into her arms, but the moment her bare hands touch the soaked fabric, a jolt of sheer terror strikes her. The princess is as cold as a corpse. That chilling, lifeless sensation violently drags the matriarch back to the darkest, most agonizing day of her life, weeping bitterly over her own son's coffin. Panic completely overtakes her anger. She screams for the royal physician, ordering the useless staff to immediately move the fragile girl inside. She cannot, and will not, let history repeat itself. The stormy courtyard is finally left behind as they rush Medea into her private chambers, desperate to warm her up before it is entirely too late. But even safely tucked into bed, the nightmare isn't over. As they anxiously wait for the doctor, the matriarch realizes the bedroom is terribly drafty. Why is the princess's room so cold and dreary, she demands, shivering in the oppressive gloom. A frantic maid quickly apologizes, bowing her head before rushing off to light a desperately needed fire. The older woman scoffs at the abysmal service, only to learn that the corrupt head maid deliberately fired all the original staff just to isolate her victim. Sounds like a classic villain move, doesn't it? Looking around the barren quarters, the matriarch is struck by the undeniable truth. Vicious rumors claimed Medea was living in decadent luxury under the second prince's protection, yet there isn't a single trace of wealth or comfort anywhere in sight. Staring at the pale, shivering girl, the matriarch feels a heavy knot of shame form in her chest. This isn't a grand palace fit for royalty. It looks exactly like an abandoned, forgotten prison. Before she can fully process her terrible mistake, a servant calls out, snapping her to attention. Someone has finally arrived. A terrified maid finally returns, but she is completely alone. The matriarch demands to know why the doctor isn't with her. The trembling servant stammers out an unbelievable excuse. The royal physician outright refused the emergency summons because he is supposedly too busy. His actual priority? Another noble lady got a tiny paper cut from an invitation. You can't make this up. The older woman's face darkens with absolute fury. A minor scratch takes precedence over saving the king's only sister. She clenches her heavy skirts, realizing her prolonged mourning period allowed this entire palace to rot from the inside out. The blatant disrespect shown to the frail princess is utterly sickening. Looking down at Medea's feverish state, the matriarch's fierce protective instincts finally ignite. She coldly orders the cowering maid to summon the doctor one more time, strictly forbidding her from mentioning who is waiting in the room. Her eyes harden with dangerous resolve. It is time she set this broken royal family straight herself. A physician finally marches into the royal quarters, his bitter grumbling echoing down the quiet halls. He barely spares a glance for the anxious maids before loudly complaining about being dragged back and forth. After all, he viciously snaps. The fragile princess faints at the drop of a hat anyway. He cruelly jokes that the girl hasn't even stopped breathing yet, whining that his only real fear is getting on Claudio's bad side. But his arrogant rant dies in his throat. An incredibly icy voice suddenly cuts through the heavy tension of the room. You wouldn't come no matter how many times you were called, yet you have no restraint in what you say about royalty. Her Majesty the Queen is standing right behind him. The furious monarch glares down at the trembling man as he instantly drops to the polished floor, desperately begging for his miserable life. He cries out that he has committed a crime worthy of death. Staring at the pathetic wretch, she coldly offers to grant that exact wish. With a sharp wave of her hand, she orders the royal guards to drag him away. Stripping a traitor of his medical position simply isn't enough to satisfy her boiling rage. Who wouldn't banish his entire clan from the capital for the rest of their lives? As the man's pathetic pleas fade down the corridor, the heavy silence rushes back in. The queen gently rubs her aching temples, casting a deeply sorrowful look toward the grand bed. To think the young princess's authority has plummeted so low that even a lowly doctor ignores her desperate summons. Honestly, I wouldn't let anyone treat her that way. The sickly girl lies feverish and trembling under the heavy blankets, completely oblivious to the fierce protection her fragile presence just commanded. Outside, the freezing night air bites at the towering castle walls. The queen quietly descends the stone steps with her loyal maid, leaving the silent royal quarters behind. Will this harsh lesson finally teach the arrogant staff some much-needed respect? Stepping out into the biting night air, Her Majesty finally allows a faint, relieved smile to touch her tense lips. Her loyal maid walks close behind, gently reassuring her that the newly summoned physician, Sir Herotos, will take impeccable care of the fragile girl. If anyone can save her, it is him. Inside the dimly lit chamber, the diligent doctor is already hard at work. He delivers a grim prognosis, his face pale as he marvels that the sickly royal endured 5 agonizing days in such a terribly neglected state. Vowing to do absolutely everything in his medical power, he gently urges the exhausted monarch to get some sleep. But a peaceful night's rest is the absolute last thing on her mind. Navigating the shadowy stone pathways of the courtyard, the furious ruler stops completely in her tracks. Her icy gaze locks onto a distant glow. Across the sweeping grounds sits a dazzling, brightly lit estate belonging to the Duchess of Claudio. The queen's expression hardens into deep, simmering disgust. How can mere collateral relatives live in absolute splendor while the true royal heir wastes away in a shabby, isolated wing? Sounds completely backward, right? Turning her back on the lavish mansion, she marches off into the enveloping darkness with a renewed, dangerous resolve. Her patience is entirely gone, and honestly, I don't blame her. She has been shut away and completely passive for far too long. Hours pass, and warm sunlight finally pours through the tall windows as the terrible fever breaks. The young princess slowly parts her heavy eyelids, her brilliant green eyes blinking against the harsh morning glare. Weakly pushing herself up from the tangled sheets, she softly whispers to the empty room, wondering how much time has slipped away. A sudden, sharp gasp shatters the quiet. A young maid stands frozen in the doorway, nearly dropping her heavy breakfast tray in sheer disbelief. Panic instantly floods the loyal servant's teary eyes as she rushes to the bedside, frantically begging the stubborn girl to lie back down before she collapses again. Sitting up against the heavy wooden headboard, the young princess immediately asks Neril for a full, detailed report on the time she lost. The loyal maid gently breaks the tense silence with truly shocking news. Madame Cuisine, the cruel servant who openly tormented her, has already died in a cold prison cell. Following her sudden collapse, a fierce investigation was launched to punish anyone guilty of insulting the royal family. Her Majesty personally stepped in to restore absolute discipline, aggressively assisted by Sir Cecere. Even the corrupt nobles tied to Cuisine's wicked schemes didn't escape the harsh, sweeping purge. With innocent blood and tainted gold spilling behind closed doors, high society is already frantically whispering about a major shift in power. Rumors are spreading like wildfire that the fierce queen's icy heart has finally turned toward the rightful royal heir. The sickly girl's brilliant green eyes gleam with a dark, calculated satisfaction. Good. This means the regent duke's overwhelming political momentum is finally weakening. She confirms that Madame Pinatelli is rapidly overhauling the castle's darkest corners just as intended. Her uncle's left hand is permanently severed. Now, she just needs to cut off his right hand, the endlessly greedy Count Etienne. But before executing her next grand move against the corrupt nobility, there is one final piece of trash she needs to clean up. With an eerie calm, she asks for Mariu's exact location. Deep beneath the dazzling palace, the treacherous red-haired maid sits chained to a freezing, sunlit dungeon wall. A terrifyingly familiar voice cuts through the heavy shadows, making the bruised prisoner jolt in sheer panic. The fragile princess stands entirely silent on the other side of the iron bars. Desperation floods Mariu's tear-stained face as she lunges toward the cold metal grate. Crashing to her knees, she presses her trembling hands together to beg for her miserable life. She screams that she was terribly wrong, crying, "I'll never betray you again. Honestly, I wouldn't believe a snake's apology." Staring coldly through the heavy iron bars, the princess flatly rejects the frantic apologies. She clearly remembers the treacherous maid slandering her directly to her grandmother. Why on earth would she believe these sudden, pathetic tears? Desperate not to be abandoned in the freezing dungeon, Mariu presses against the metal grate. She wails that her loyalty is genuine, screaming that she will do absolutely anything if she is just spared. The royal heir decides to test that bold promise immediately. Demanding a sworn oath, she calmly passes a small glass vial through the narrow gap. It contains a lethal, slow-acting poison that completely paralyzes the limbs. If an antidote isn't provided in time, it triggers fatal cardiac arrest. Trapped by her own desperate lies, the terrified servant freezes under the sickly girl's piercing green gaze. Reminded that her miserable life hangs by a single thread, she realizes she has absolutely no way out. With a broken, trembling smile, Mariu tearfully accepts the deadly ultimatum. The princess watches in chilling silence as the weeping traitor forces down the dark liquid. She already knows a vital secret about this pathetic prisoner. Mariu is actually the hidden lover of Saman, the young Duke of Claudio. To finally tear down her corrupt uncle's remaining political power, having a poisoned pawn securely by the throat will be incredibly useful. Sunlight bathes the royal estate as the princess prepares for a crucial meeting. She has her maid dress her as modestly as possible, selecting simple jewelry. She knows exactly what kind of innocent, vulnerable impression she needs to project today. But beneath that demure facade, she's already pulling strings. She casually asks the trembling red-haired maid if she's taken her antidote, flashing a sweet smile as she reminds the girl to keep returning for regular doses. In this dangerous new life, absolute loyalty requires strict insurance. Before the tension can fully settle in the room, another servant interrupts to announce that Her Majesty the Queen Dowager is waiting. The princess gracefully agrees, her perfect mask never wavering. If you ask me, she is completely in her element. In the opulent drawing room, the atmosphere is stifling. The princess joins her cousin at the table, perfectly composed. As she takes a delicate sip of tea, she feels the Queen Dowager's sharp, evaluating gaze burning into her every movement. Setting her cup down without a single clink, she waits. The older woman clears her throat, visibly impressed that the princess's demeanor remains flawless even after being bedridden. With a warm, practiced smile, she thanks her grandmother for the concern. Her pink-haired cousin instantly bristles. She demands to know when the princess became so refined, loudly accusing her of faking ignorance during her past lessons. The princess politely counters that her aunt's tutor only taught standard aristocratic etiquette, which simply wasn't suitable for her royal needs. Outraged, the cousin yells that she learned from that exact same tutor. It's a spectacular blunder as the Queen Dowager glares at the girl, coldly asking if she's implying that her own traditional upbringing is wrong. Checkmate, wouldn't you agree? The Queen Dowager looks visibly annoyed, completely ignoring the pink-haired girl's foolish outburst. Instead, she turns her sharp gaze to Medea. She remarks that the kingdom's only true princess looks far too plain in her current attire. A servant swiftly presents a lavishly carved jewelry box. Opening the lid to reveal priceless heirlooms, the older woman invites her granddaughter to take her pick. Beside them, the cousin covers her mouth, her eyes burning with unhidden jealousy. Medea calmly lowers her head, offering a picture-perfect smile as she thanks her grandmother for the generosity. But her cousin immediately panics. Her mind races with the terrifying thought that Medea is about to claim all the best pieces for herself. Unable to control her greed, the girl lunges across the table. She loudly insists that she'll choose first since her supposed sister is taking too long. Reaching for a stunning sapphire, she remains entirely oblivious to the storm brewing beside her. The Queen Dowager's patience snaps. She slams her hands down, her booming voice echoing through the opulent room as she demands to know when she ever offered the girl a gift. The cousin freezes, stammering out a pathetic excuse. The matriarch isn't having it. With ice in her tone, she orders the girl to address Medea properly as Your Highness. She ruthlessly reminds the trembling teenager that merely living in the palace doesn't make her an equal to true royal blood. Stripped of her unearned status, the cousin stares in absolute devastation. Tears well up as she wails that she's only acting how she always has, completely bewildered by the hostility. Unable to handle the harsh reality check, she throws a massive tantrum and sprints out of the room. Sounds like someone finally got put in her place. The Queen Dowager sighs, staring at the empty doorway. She coldly admits to herself that she hasn't realized just how immature the girl was, regretting that she coddled her too much. But Medea isn't done playing the perfect forgiving peacemaker. She gently asks the older woman to try and understand Verna's outburst. Then Medea casually drops a carefully worded poison pill. She innocently explains that since the two girls shared everything in the castle, Verna must be confused by the sudden boundaries. The Queen Dowager freezes, her eyes widening. The realization is horrifying. A mere collateral noble has been raised as a total equal to the direct line royal princess. Before the matriarch can fully process that treacherous implication, Medea elegantly shifts her attention back to the jewels. Bypassing the dazzling sapphires and heavy gold, she selects a seemingly plain folding fan, but she knows exactly what she's holding. The ribs are forged from solid Damascus steel, transforming a modest accessory into a lethal concealed weapon. The older woman watches her in stunned silence, Seeing the kingdom's true heir dressed so simply and opting for a practical blade completely shatters every nasty rumor of the princess's supposed extravagance. Touched by the modest choice, the queen softly grants her permission to take it. After Medea offers a graceful goodbye, the opulent drawing room falls dead silent. Alone with her thoughts, the queen dowager's expression twists into a fierce, calculating scowl. The seeds of suspicion have firmly taken root. If Verna doesn't know her place, does her father, Duke Joaquin, harbor the same treasonous ambitions? A chilling anger darkens her gaze. She will absolutely not allow overstepping relatives to threaten the true royal bloodline. Calling for her trusted maid, she orders an immediate letter to be drafted to summon the extended family. I certainly wouldn't want to be in the Duke's shoes right now. The real war for the throne has officially begun. Meanwhile, Duke Joaquin slams his fist against his desk in absolute fury. The royal summons has just reached his estate, and he is livid that his mother explicitly called upon the Margrave of Montega. He knows exactly what this means. The matriarch is deliberately using his late brother's loyalists to keep his treasonous ambitions in check. His elegant wife smoothly approaches the desk, casually adding fuel to the fire. She reveals that their daughter Verna was just chased out of the palace drawing room in tears, harshly scolded for disrespecting the princess. The Duke slumps into his chair and rubs his face, completely bewildered by his mother's sudden hostility. But the financial damage is already catastrophic. The Queen Dowager hasn't just evicted them from the castle grounds. She ruthlessly dismantled the corrupt merchant guilds they were using to siphon the kingdom's royal funds. With public opinion rapidly shifting to support Medea, the Duke's treacherous web is falling apart. Staring at an urgent payment demand from a shady mercenary corps, he begins to panic. Without that stolen gold, his planned revolution will literally go up in smoke. He grits his teeth in terror, realizing that if anyone discovers he framed his niece, his entire claim to the throne will instantly vanish. His wife, however, remains entirely unbothered by the crisis. Gently placing a reassuring hand over his, she reminds him that they still control the minister of the royal household. As long as they hold influence over the inner palace staff, they can easily strike before the Margrave even arrives in the capital. When he desperately asks for her plan, her lips curl into a vicious, calculating smile. She suggests throwing a massive, lavish banquet to publicly celebrate the princess's recovery. By forcing the girl to parade around in extravagant gold, they will shatter her innocent image and kill any public sympathy. Sounds like a deadly social minefield, doesn't it? The Duke flashes a wicked grin as a brand new trap is set. Standing before a grand banner, the Duchess smiles with chilling confidence. She declares they'll just keep doing exactly what they've always done. Placing her hand on the family crest, she reveals their true, sickening strategy. Just like before, Medea will serve as their perfect, disposable shield. In the quiet sanctuary of her sunlit study, the princess turns a silver letter opener in her hands, her mind already moving pieces across a dangerous board. A cloaked figure slips silently into the room, bowing low to deliver a crucial report. If she's nervous about her grand revenge, she certainly isn't showing it. Her loyal agent confirms that the secret message has successfully reached Umberto. The man was incredibly wary of the sudden contact, but their operative, Tom, managed to slip past his defenses perfectly. In fact, Tom is already begging to be used for her next scheme. The spy hesitates for a moment, questioning the endgame. She wants to know exactly where the princess plans to use such a notoriously greedy pawn. Trusting a man obsessed with gold is a massive gamble in a castle full of vipers. Can she really pull this off? The princess only offers a chilling, elegant smile. To hunt, one must first set a trap, she murmurs softly. With Umberto's greed now stoked, she orders Tom to keep a relentless watch on his movements. Her eyes gleam with dark anticipation as the hunting grounds are finally prepared. Gazing out at the towering spires of the royal estate, she knows the easiest part is over. Now she must face a far more formidable opponent. It is time to go meet the hunter, she declares, ready to step out of the shadows. Later, Sir Cecere enters her private parlor, offering a stiff, formal greeting that barely masks his underlying frustration. As he takes a seat across from her delicate tea spread, he gets straight to the point, demanding to know exactly why she summoned him today. Behind his wire-rimmed glasses, Cecere's eyes narrow with intense suspicion. She has been unsettlingly quiet lately, far too docile for his liking. With Claudio's oppressive influence finally starting to wane across the estate, Cecere tightly clenches his fist. He knows she is plotting something dangerous. Cecere refuses to hold back his intense disgust as they sit down for tea. He begs her to abandon her support for Claudio, outright calling her uncle a plague upon their struggling nation. The princess doesn't even flinch at the blunt insult. She takes a slow, deliberate sip of her warm drink, calmly stating that Claudio is exactly why she is visiting today. Suddenly, her bright emerald eyes narrow. A strange, bitter scent drifting from her cup catches her immediate attention. When Cicere curiously points out the tea's highly unique aroma, the princess just smiles thinly. She casually praises her loyal maid for taking the time to hand brew such a special medicinal blend. Turning a piercing gaze toward the nervous servant, she generously invites the woman to have a taste. The maid immediately shrinks back. Sweating profusely under the pressure, she stammers that a lowly worker could never dare touch a royal beverage. Are we really supposed to believe this innocent act? The princess stands up abruptly, her elegant demeanor vanishing entirely. She strictly warns the girl not to make her repeat a royal command. Deeply unsettled by this sudden burst of hostility, Cicere quickly jumps in to defend his staff, demanding an explanation for her seemingly cruel behavior. The princess completely ignores his frustrated protests. Snatching up the delicate porcelain cup from the table, she steps right into the terrified servant's personal space. With a terrifyingly cold glare, she forcefully orders the trembling woman to drink the tea. If an assassin tried to serve me that, I'd pour it down their throat too. Cicere shouts her name in utter disbelief. Convinced that she has finally lost her mind, the princess effortlessly cuts through his outrage with one chilling question. Is it because you cannot drink a poison that causes madness? She asks the maid softly. She coldly reveals that Cicere is blindly defending a traitor who just laced his own master's drink. The terrified maid collapses to her knees, bursting into violent sobs as she desperately begs for mercy. Faced with the horrifying prospect of swallowing her own poisoned brew, her fragile loyalty to her blackmailer instantly shatters. Cicere can only stare in mute horror as the treason unfolds right in his own parlor. The girl confesses everything. Duke Claudio threatened her life, ordering her to slip the tainted blend into Cicere's daily routine. The goal wasn't a quick assassination, but a slow, agonizing descent into madness. Who could survive a daily dose of liquid poison from their most trusted servant? The princess watches the pathetic display with icy detachment, pieces of her previous timeline finally clicking together. She vividly remembers how a once brilliant politician like Cicere mysteriously vanished into total seclusion. He had ultimately taken his own life to escape his creeping insanity, all orchestrated by her uncle's invisible dagger. Deeply disgusted by the brazen betrayal within his own home, Cicere rings for his personal guards to haul the weeping traitor away. The desperate servant screams for forgiveness, violently thrashing against the armed men as she is dragged backward. Cicere just watches her go with a cold, hardened glare. The traitor's frantic wails are abruptly severed by the heavy slam of the parlor doors. Now completely alone, a suffocating silence stretches between the two nobles. The shocking revelation has left the man entirely off balance. He finally turns to her, demanding to know how she recognized the deadly taint. Taking her seat with elegant poise, she casually claims she encountered the aroma once by pure luck. But we know her past is much darker than that, don't we? In reality, the brutal, bloody hardships of her previous military expedition taught her the distinct, bitter scent of Hallis. She warns Cicere that the lethal herb rots the human mind through its fragrance alone. Cicere is completely reeling from the revelation. He quietly advises her to take an antidote just in case, but his mind is racing with a much bigger question. Why the sudden change of heart? She has spent years blindly protecting the corrupt house of Claudio. The princess stares out the sunlit window, her expression hauntingly serene. She softly confesses that brushing so close to death finally opened her eyes to the horrifying truth. She knows exactly what her greedy uncle is truly after, and she knows Cicere sees it too. Her voice suddenly hardens with absolute royal authority. She declares her true purpose. She will fiercely protect Valdina, the kingdom her late brother left behind. To cripple Claudio, she must sever his right hand, Count Etienne. In exchange for his loyalty, she offers Cicere an irresistible reward. She will help him control his unstable mana. A genuine, intrigued smile breaks across Cicere's guarded face. The Count is a notoriously difficult target, but Cicere is fully on board. Leaning back in his ornate chair, he eagerly asks the princess to lay out her master plan. Sounds simple, right? Meanwhile, a very different kind of tension is brewing elsewhere. Inside a sunlit manor, a blonde mercenary named Carlo waves a glittering envelope at his stubborn boss. He can't believe their notoriously ruthless group, Akanes, has been personally invited to the princess's recovery banquet. If you ask me, these guys are walking into her next trap. Carlo cheerfully argues they should attend just to scope out Duke Claudio's defenses. But his boss coldly dismisses the idea without even turning around. As Carlo keeps pushing, pointing out how incredibly suspicious the sudden royal summons is, the mood in the room abruptly shifts. The imposing black-haired leader suddenly gasps, violently clutching his chest in agony. Dark, unnatural veins pulse wildly beneath his torn collar. Sweating profusely, he grits his teeth and desperately orders a panicked Carlo to fetch Terence right now. It seems the princess isn't the only one hiding a deadly secret. Under a blood-red sky, time is rapidly running out. The prince's loyal mage companion delivers a grim diagnosis. The intervals between his seizures are shrinking. After 3 agonizing years, the magic keeping the dark curse at bay is finally reaching its absolute limit. How much longer can he endure? But the cursed royal seems entirely unfazed by his own impending doom. While the mage frets over his failing body, the prince just calmly buttons his crisp white shirt. How is he still gorgeous while literally dying? He hears the desperate warnings, yet a reckless smirk remains. Desperate to save him, the frantic mage begs him to retreat to the magic tower. Even if the master there cannot fully lift the affliction, they could at least slow its lethal progression. But the prince immediately shoots down the idea. And essentially just wait for a slow, drawn-out death, he asks. Leaning casually by the sunlit window, he flashes a devastatingly confident smile. They both know perfectly well that fading away quietly simply isn't in his nature. He is a man of action, not a tragic victim waiting for the end. Sounds simple, right? The mage can only sigh in defeat, recognizing that same ruthless glint in his eyes. It's the exact look he wore when he swept away every obstacle to become the first prince of Kazan, the youngest commander-in-chief, and a feared mercenary captain. He seized those legendary titles by absolute force. However, this current mission is a massive, unprecedented risk. Is he truly certain that seeking out this mysterious priestess will actually resolve the curse? If she fails, what will he do? Unshaken, the prince just crosses his arms in defiance. As long as a single possibility remains, he won't let it slip away. He has sacrificed far too much to turn back now. Masquerading as a lowly mercenary and striking profitless deals with old academy classmates, he's clung to this sliver of hope. Every single step leading here has been a high-stakes gamble. As he puts it, I have no use for a peaceful death. Far from the lavish halls of the palace, the silver-haired royal ventures deep into the most wretched, forgotten slums of the kingdom. The absolute despair is suffocating. Children are reduced to catching sewer rats just to survive another day. Overwhelmed by the stench of rot and misery, her distressed companion begs her to turn back before it's too late. She completely dismisses his concern. They have a mission to track down the family of a specific retired soldier. Her aide remains totally baffled as to why anyone would voluntarily choose this squalor. Honestly, I'm right there with him. After all, she had personally funded a beautiful relief center just for these veterans. Does this broken district harbor that much resentment toward the crown? While half the kingdom's retired fighters gratefully accepted her safe haven, the rest stubbornly remained in the shadows. But she isn't here to play the benevolent savior. She keeps her darkest, bloodiest secret locked firmly away. In her previous life, a ruthless rebel commander rose from these exact streets. Now, armed with the bitter memories of her past failure, she needs to find him first. Her eyes are cold with calculating resolve. Once she tracks this blonde man down, she must make a terrible choice. Will she win his loyalty or simply eliminate the threat preemptively? Her grim thoughts are abruptly interrupted by a chaotic scuffle breaking out nearby over a stolen scrap of bread. When her loyal knight immediately offers to step in and handle the desperate thugs, she allows it with one strict condition. He must handle them gently and ensure no one actually gets hurt. But as she steps away from the commotion, an unsettling voice singles her out. A sinister-looking old crone emerges from the dim alleyway, blocking her path. Flashing a deeply unnerving smile, she makes a bold claim. "I am the oldest, deepest-rooted tree in this kingdom," she rasps, offering a fortune reading. The withered hand reaches out, promising a magical glimpse into her destiny. Yet the hardened royal merely tightens her cloak and brushes past the strange woman. "No, thank you. I already know it," she answers coldly. After dying once already, she doesn't need a stranger to tell her how her future ends. The crone's chilling words freeze the silver-haired royal in her tracks. Shouldn't this life be different from the one before? How could a random beggar in the slums possibly know about her previous death? Utterly shocked and lured into the trap, she turns back to face the grinning old woman. Rolling 2 cracked crystal spheres in her weathered hands, the seer casts a radiant magical projection against the murky sky. Her cryptic reading paints a rather bleak picture of this hard-won second chance. Apparently, chaos still veils her celestial path, actively working to steal away her light. Yet the withered woman promises a brutal salvation. She claims a giant falling star will soon crash into her world, destined to cleave through the encroaching darkness. A heavenly protector sent just for her? Honestly, I wouldn't trust a slum prophecy that easily either. It just sounds too convenient. Naturally, our fiercely independent royal completely rejects the celestial help. She coldly declares she will handle her treacherous destiny entirely alone, clicking her tongue in sharp disapproval. The crone warns that nasty, clinging things have already latched onto her fragile new fate. Dropping the mystical facade, the seer steps close and gently grasps her gloved hand. She asks if the regressor has ever heard of the Tears of Dawn. It is a mythical elixir holding the goddess's raw power, supposedly capable of erasing sickness, memories, and even fate. Sacred tears are the only thing that can save the falling star. The old woman's trembling grip tightens as she delivers a revelation that shakes the young lady to her core. The heavens cherish her so deeply they displace the very constellations just to turn back time on her behalf. She carries the divine blood of the goddess's true messenger. Because of this ancient lineage, she is the sole person under the sky capable of finding this sacred relic. But before the desperate seer can finish her dire instructions, a sickening sound interrupts the monumental prophecy. The old woman violently coughs up a horrific spray of black blood, her body abruptly failing her. Shocked by the sudden collapse, the regressor quickly supports the frail seer and pleads with her to find a physician. But the old woman simply wipes the gruesome black blood from her chin, completely unfazed. She dismisses the terrifying symptom as a mere warning sent by the heavens. Smiling faintly at the young lady's enduring kindness, the crone insists her time hasn't come just yet. With a gentle push, she urges the royal to hurry along her destined path. Turning away into the murky alley, the weathered seer leaves one final, lingering instruction echoing in the light. "Do not forget this old man's words," she warns. Left completely alone in the quiet slums, the silver-haired royal cannot shake the suffocating weight of that cryptic prophecy. The sacred Tears of Dawn, a giant falling star, as she quietly ponders how these impossible myths fit into her brutal second chance. Heavy footsteps abruptly break her concentration. She looks up to find a broad-shouldered mercenary and his rugged men blocking the narrow dirt path. Unbeknownst to her, the recklessly defiant First Prince, the exact cursed star she was just warned about, has finally crossed her path. If she wanted to avoid messy destinies, it is officially too late. Deep within the crumbling, destitute slums, Cesare and his trusted companions navigate a labyrinth of squalid, dead-end alleys. They are chasing a fragile rumor about a hidden elder who still speaks the ancient continental language and bears the forgotten crest of the Sedea tribe. His men warn him against clinging to false hope, reminding him that the clan's been extinct for decades. Does a ghost still walk these streets? Suddenly, a cloaked figure materializes from the shadows, dryly chiding the group for making an old man wait. Pushing past his startled guards, Cesare immediately locks onto the stranger, asking point-blank if he is the elusive shaman they've been seeking. The elder merely chuckles, the shadows falling away to reveal a single, eerily glowing green eye. He addresses Cesare with a chilling title, the Black Star. He sees right through the disguise, noting the primordial darkness pitifully entangled in his fate. A fatal curse designed to cling violently until its victim takes their final breath. Desperate for salvation, Cesare swallows his pride and drops heavily to one knee in the dirt. He's been searching endlessly for the former leader, promising to restore the ruined tribe to its former glory in exchange for a cure. Honestly, if he's offering a blank check to a stranger, he's running out of time. The old man firmly rejects the political bargain, but admits a cure exists. To purge this primordial evil, the shaman declares that Cesare requires something entirely mythical, the Tears of Dawn. Sounds like a fairy tale. When Cesare's blonde companion demands to know what that actually means, the elder's expression turns incredibly solemn. It is the literal sorrow of a goddess left behind upon this cursed land. He recounts an ancient legend from when the world was first choked by utter chaos and despair. A merciful deity descended, weeping for the endless suffering of mortal lives, and her divine, radiant tears washed away the suffocating darkness. Cesare doesn't care if it's myth or madness. His golden eyes harden with unwavering resolve. Where can I find it? But before Cesare can even process the impossibility of tracking down a myth, the elder's glowing eye dims. He rasps that fate itself has already forbidden Cesare from finding the relic. A horrific coughing fit violently interrupts his grim prophecy, black blood splattering across his trembling hands. Cesare catches the frail man as his legs give out, desperately ordering his men to fetch a healer. The elder waves off the futile gesture. With his dying breath, he locks a frantic grip onto Cesare's armor and croaks out one final, desperate plea. Only the golden star of Valdina can guide him now. The old man's bloody lips curve into a peaceful yet entirely unsettling smile. He whispers that the stars have finally gathered once again. Then his body goes completely limp. Cesare's blonde confidant quickly checks his pulse, solemnly confirming that their only lead has just died in the dirt. His men are understandably frustrated. They finally track down the elusive shaman only to be left with a cryptic riddle about a star. But Cesare's expression hardens with quiet realization. He orders Gallo to send word back home. They are extending their stay in Valdina indefinitely. The myth of the Golden Star isn't just an abstract celestial concept, but a living title intimately tied to the radiant, untouchable figure at the heart of the kingdom's faith. If he needs a miracle, he's going straight to the source. Meanwhile, across the sunset-drenched streets of that very city, a silver-haired woman wanders in heavy disguise. Her anxious knight apologizes profusely for stepping away from her side, but her highness gently waves off his excessive hovering. Honestly, I love a royal who doesn't mind sneaking out. She's far more focused on matching her master's mysterious handwritten notes to the labyrinth of alleyways around them. Have they finally found the right spot? Before her guard can confirm the location, an angry shout shatters the evening quiet, violently demanding the whereabouts of a bastard named Tio. Inside a dilapidated shack, a ruthless thug corners a terrified red-haired girl. He violently demands the whereabouts of the fugitive he's hunting, ignoring her desperate pleas that he ran away a long time ago. Unwilling to leave empty-handed, the brute decides she's a decent consolation prize, threatening to sell her off instead as he aggressively reaches out to drag her into the streets. The disguised princess isn't about to just stand by and watch a kidnapping. With a single, sharp command to Neril, her loyal knight instantly materializes between the thug and his weeping victim, sword perfectly angled for a lethal strike. I love a knight who doesn't hesitate. Realizing he's massively outmatched, the terrified coward scrambles for the door, tossing back empty threats as he flees into the fading evening light. Still shivering on the floorboards, the battered girl tearfully thanks her mysterious saviors. But her highness is entirely focused on confirming the hunch that drew her into this dangerous neighborhood to begin with. She asks point-blank if the girl's brother is named Tio. When the young woman eagerly confirms they are actually twins, a glint of profound realization flashes across the royal's emerald eyes. Staring into the girl's freckled face, a chaotic memory from her previous life violently resurfaces. She remembers the terrifying night the rebellion breached the castle, fleeing through the dark as soldiers shouted for the princess's capture. That was the night she crossed paths with a fierce, brown-haired rebel named Tio. Looking closely at this frightened girl now, the striking family resemblance is impossible to deny. Kneeling down in the dirt to meet the girl at eye level, the disguised royal gently asks if she's surviving out in these brutal slums entirely alone. The girl nods solemnly. She explains that her brother left 3 years ago, sending secretive messages claiming it's too dangerous to come home. The timeline pieces lock perfectly into place. Her Highness knows exactly why he can't return. 3 years ago, Tio had already pledged his life to the rebel army. Before the princess can leave, trembling fingers desperately catch the edge of her cloak. Honestly, I'd beg for a way out too. The girl heard Neril slip up with the royal title earlier. She tearfully pleads to be taken away, terrified she'll be sold off to the next thug who kicks down her door. The disguised royal hesitates. She offers enough coin for an escape, coldly stating she doesn't keep just anyone by her side. But the fierce redhead refuses the pity payout. Bowing to the dirty floorboards, she swears she's incredibly useful. She survived by doing whatever it takes, offering to handle the dark, secret tasks nobles are too afraid to touch. The princess stares down in silence. Looking into the girl's defiant eyes, she sees the exact same rebellious fire that once drove her brother. She offers one final heavy warning, noting the girl might deeply regret taking her as a master. But the young woman doesn't flinch. She boldly claims this dangerous path as her own choice. A soft light returns to the royal's emerald eyes. Letting her hood fall back, she formally extends a gloved hand, ordering the girl to follow. The redhead eagerly clasps her savior's hand, pledging her absolute loyalty on the spot. Sounds like a heartwarming rescue, right? Not exactly. Just outside the shack, a gang of armed thugs waits in the creeping shadows, grinning as they ready heavy ropes and drawn blades. The journey comes to an abrupt and tense halt on the shadowy forest path. A band of armed men emerges from the trees, encircling the carriage to block any chance of escape. Neril, the royal guard, instantly goes on high alert as the arrogant leader saunters forward, smugly demanding to know where they think they're going. The thug claims there are unsettled accounts. But his wicked grin tells another story entirely. It's a human trafficking ring, and their target is the terrified red-haired girl, Saya. Gripping a heavy coil of rope, the bandit leader threatens the travelers, warning them to hand over all their valuables if they want to keep breathing. Safe inside the shadowed cabin, the royal traveler watches the pathetic display with complete indifference. She calmly murmurs Neril's name, and moments later, a heavy pouch of coins hits the dirt floor. The bandit snatches it up, his greedy eyes catching the glint of pure gold as he assumes the easy payout is secured. Her Highness gracefully steps down from the carriage, her imposing presence demanding silence. She declares that she is buying the child outright. Unfortunately, her immense wealth only fuels their greed. The leader smirks, noting the gold is more than enough for the scrawny kid, but capturing a breathtaking noblewoman would fetch 5 times the price. Seriously, do these idiots have a death wish? Barely registering the crude insult, she swiftly pushes Saya behind the glass, gently asking the frightened girl to wait inside. With the child out of harm's way, her expression turns to ice. She gives Neril a single quiet command to clear the trash. The loyal knight instantly draws his blade, eager to oblige. The traffickers roar with laughter at the lone swordsman, mocking his solo stance and promising to leave him begging on his knees. That is their final mistake. Neril's gaze darkens with lethal precision. In a blinding flash of silver, he launches himself forward, carving through their front lines with a sweeping, brutal strike before a single drop of blood hits the ground. Neril's blade is a blur of merciless silver, slashing through the bandits and shattering their crude confidence in mere seconds. The arrogant leader falls back, screaming as he clutches his mangled arm in sheer agony. Realizing they can't possibly defeat this monster of a knight in a fair fight, the desperate trafficker switches tactics. He screams at his remaining men to bypass the swordsman and grab the defenseless woman. Her Highness watches the thugs charge at her, her expression perfectly composed behind her fan. She learned a very bitter lesson during the tragic end of her past life. Betrayed by royal knights who treated her like disposable baggage, and abandoned by her husband, Jason, she made a solemn vow. She would never again rely on anyone else to protect her. A burly trafficker lunges at her, a greedy, sneers face as he reaches for his prize. He doesn't even see her move. In one fluid, devastatingly elegant motion, she steps inside his guard and buries the concealed blade of her fan into his chest. He drops like a stone. Neril freezes mid-swing, staring in genuine disbelief. He knew his lady possessed a fierce intellect, but he never expected this. He never imagined she would execute a man with such flawless, cold-blooded grace. Honestly, who wouldn't be a little intimidated? Seizing the brief moment of distraction, the maimed leader hurls a heavy dagger straight at the noblewoman's heart. Neril screams for her to evade, his voice cracking with panic, but she merely tracks the incoming blade. At the last possible fraction of a second, 2 forcefully thrown stones deflect the flying steel harmlessly into the dirt. Breathless and furious with himself, Neril rushes to her side, apologizing deeply for his unacceptable delay. Completely unfazed by her narrow brush with death, she calmly tells him it's fine. With the injured bandit leader whimpering in the background, Neril's gaze turns murderous. He turns to his lady with a simple question. Shall he kill them all? The princess gazes coldly at the pathetic, whimpering survivors. After a moment of heavy silence, she decides there's simply no need to dirty their hands any further. She orders Neril to wrap things up quickly so they can leave. With a sharp flick of his wrist, the knight cleans his blade as the bandit leader desperately begs for mercy. Once the royal carriage safely rolls away, the shadows of the forest shift. 2 hidden figures finally step out from the dense brush. The blonde scout lets out a breath, thoroughly impressed by the noblewoman's shockingly lethal combat skills. His masked companion agrees, utterly bewildered by the spectacle. What kind of sheltered princess executes a man by striking vital points with such cold, flawless precision? The dark-haired watcher carefully examines the fractured stone he just used to save her life. He simply can't get the image of her fierce, calculated grace out of his head. Watching her carriage disappear into the distance, a dangerous curiosity takes root. Could this deadly, captivating woman truly be Valdina's legendary golden star? I think she just earned a very powerful new admirer. Days later, back in the quiet safety of the royal estate, the brutal chaos of the road feels like a distant memory. Her loyal maid approaches with good news. Little Saya, the terrified girl they rescued, is adjusting perfectly and working hard. The princess smiles softly, but another pressing matter still weighs heavily on her mind. Did they find the mysterious old woman? The maid hesitates before apologizing. Despite their best efforts, the elderly woman has vanished completely without a trace. Her Highness lowers her gaze, a sharp pang of lingering regret crossing her delicate features. She desperately wanted to meet her just one last time. The old crone once made a cryptic claim, insisting the blood of the continent's wisest oracle flowed through her veins. But what on earth did those heavy words actually mean? Wait. If it's the wisest person then, the cryptic words suddenly click into place. The wisest person on the continent was the ancient sage, and the country protected by the sage's legendary stone is her own homeland, Valdina. She slams her heavy book shut and abruptly sprints out of the study, leaving her poor maid thoroughly bewildered. She races down the dimly lit staircases of the royal estate, her mind racing with a massive implication. If the sage's stone has been protecting this land for centuries, could it be because its original owner was actually Valdina's founding ancestor? Pushing her physical limits, she finally reaches the restricted lower vaults. She shoves open the heavy iron doors, desperate to confirm her wild theory. Beyond the threshold lies a massive vaulted sanctuary bathed in ethereal blue light. At the center of the chamber, a brilliant crystal hovers above an ancient altar, the sage's stone. The princess steps into the blinding glow, her breath catching as the immense magical energy washes over her. Approaching the altar, she gently takes the sacred crystal into her hands. If the old woman's prophecy was true, then this relic must have a purpose. "Please tell me," she whispers softly, pleading for any guidance it might hold. "If there's something you wish to tell me." In response, a blinding fissure of pure white light cracks through the solid crystal. The princess watches in awe as the ancient relic splits perfectly down the middle. Nestled safely within the broken shards is a small, pristine vial containing a glowing liquid. A forgotten myth immediately springs to her mind. Could this be the tears of dawn? It seems her dangerous new life is just getting started. Out in the sunlit, bustling streets of Valdina's first district, the royal party finally steps out of the grand theater. Her aunt, trying entirely too hard to play the gracious host, eagerly asks if the performance was to her liking. She proudly boasts about personally scouting a brand new cast and orchestra just for this specific opera. The silver-haired royal merely offers a polite, chillingly non-committal nod. That single, quiet reaction is enough to make the older woman sweat under her heavy gown. Realizing she completely missed the mark, the aunt quickly backpedals. She stammers out frantic apologies for the awkward aria, absolutely terrified of falling short of the kingdom's highest standards. Before the uncomfortable tension can truly settle, the pink-haired companion jumps in. She desperately defends the older woman's negligence, pleading with the princess not to lose her temper over a song. Then, seizing her hands with a sudden, forceful grip, the aunt pivots the conversation. She confidently promises that tonight's exclusive banquet will erase any lingering disappointment. A banquet? The older woman's smile suddenly takes on a much sharper, almost predatory edge. Leaning in close, she announces that the esteemed House of Claudio has meticulously prepared an intimate gathering. It is supposedly to honor Her Highness's recent, miraculous recovery. Sounds simple, right? Yet that cold, calculating gleam suggests a trap is already set. The preparations for this so-called modest gathering are anything but subtle. To ensure she looks the part, the group is immediately ushered into an exclusive, high-end boutique. The sunlit showroom overflows with custom, velvet-draped gowns and sparkling displays of heavy gold jewelry. The sheer opulence of the shop is enough to leave anyone entirely breathless. Feigning deep sympathy, the aunt notes how distressed her royal niece has been over various political matters lately. With a grand, sweeping gesture across the pristine room, she claims this lavish shopping trip is just a little something to lift her heavy spirits. Is anyone actually buying this sudden display of selfless family affection? Because I am definitely not. Silent maids present rows of delicate shoes while mountains of ribbon-wrapped gifts pile up higher on the display tables. The absolute extravagance of the gesture leaves her younger companion completely stunned, gasping out loud at the staggering, undeniable cost of it all. It is a blindingly expensive bribe, waiting to see if she will finally take the bait. The silver-haired princess calmly acknowledges the overwhelming display of wealth, thanking her aunt for the extreme attention. The older host beams with predatory pride, claiming there is absolutely no greater joy than pleasing the royal lady. But sitting right beside them, Verna is practically vibrating with hidden rage. She glares sharply at her guest, deeply offended that Medea isn't throwing herself at their feet in gratitude for such an outrageously expensive bribe. Unaware of the silent hostility, the older woman cheerfully announces that she has prepared a highly specific custom gown for tonight's banquet. With her grand gesture complete, she smoothly excuses herself from the showroom. She leaves strict orders for the pink-haired girl Verna to wait behind and escort the princess once the fitting is done. Left with no choice, Verna forces out a stiff, deeply bitter agreement. When the boutique's eager staff steps forward to strip away her old clothes, Medea immediately waves them off. Instead, she calls upon Mariu, the red-haired maid standing quietly in the shadows, to attend to her personally. Together, they disappear behind the heavy velvet curtains of the grand changing room. This leaves the resentful hostess completely alone in the lounge, stewing in her own toxic thoughts. Waiting in the oppressive silence, Verna furiously bites down on her thumb. She internally mocks the prince's supposed weakness, sneering at her for still clinging to a maid known for betrayal. Honestly, who wouldn't relish a little premature gloating while they wait? She smugly convinces herself of one highly arrogant conclusion. Does she really think she can pull off such fine clothes? That arrogant illusion violently shatters the very second the curtains part. The heavy rustle of embroidered fabric draws Verna's gaze, and her eyes widen in sheer horror. Medea steps into the sunlight, draped in a breathtaking white and gold gown that practically glows like descended starlight. The boutique staff practically weep over her radiant, fairy-like beauty. Meanwhile, Verna leaps to her feet, entirely paralyzed by a reality she refuses to accept. "This shouldn't be happening," she stammers out. Before she can process the devastating blow, a maid quietly interrupts, presenting a modest box for her own fitting. Verna looks down and instantly loses all the color in her face. Inside rests a dreadfully plain, dull-toned dress adorned with one pathetic, childish ribbon. The cruel reality finally sets in. If she enters the banquet hall wearing this dismal scrap of fabric right next to the impossibly radiant Medea, she will become nothing more than a laughable, forgotten shadow. Verna can already hear the cruel, mocking whispers of the nobility echoing in her mind. They sneer at her plain attire, reducing her to a lowly servant meant to highlight the royal's brilliance. The sheer humiliation of being forced to play Medea's pathetic foil tears violently at her pride. Shaking with indignant fury, she tightly grips the cheap fabric of her assigned dress. What is it that I am lacking? Why must she remain in the shadows? Completely unbothered by the heavy tension, Medea gracefully turns to show off her radiant gown. She innocently asks for her companion's honest opinion on the extravagant look. Trapped by her lower social standing, Verna has absolutely no choice but to swallow her resentment. She forces out a painfully stiff smile that barely reaches her furious eyes. Through gritted teeth, she offers a polite compliment, yet her internal thoughts are already twisting into a dark, venomous thicket of absolute hatred. Later that evening, the grand banquet hall opens its doors to a blinding display of wealth. Towering crystal sculptures and endless pyramids of sparkling champagne greet the kingdom's elite. But the atmosphere is far from celebratory. The guests are already murmuring vicious rumors, falsely believing the princess selfishly demanded this lavish party herself. Margrave Montega openly voices his deep disgust. The country is at war and the streets are full of starving citizens. Yet she carelessly indulges in luxury. Other aristocrats eagerly join the toxic gossip, quickly tearing down the royal's remaining reputation. They dismiss Medea as a foolish, immature child who holds entirely too much unearned power. One smug lord heavily laughs off her supposed vanity. He confidently claims that throwing a lavish banquet will easily keep the immature girl pacified. It is a meticulously coordinated smear campaign, desperately designed to turn the entire nobility against her. Watching the hostility spread through the room, a red-eyed noble smirks into his glass. He silently anticipates the final, devastating piece of his trap. Is she walking blindly into an ambush? If this calculating lord thinks he has already won, he is severely underestimating our girl. Right on cue, the royal herald's booming voice cuts through the heavy, toxic tension. He formally announces the long-awaited arrival of the princess and her supposedly humble companion. The grand doors finally begin to swing wide open. The vicious murmurs instantly die in their throats. Instead of an arrogant royal flaunting her wealth, the crowd is paralyzed by a completely unexpected sight. Verna steps into the hall wearing the breathtaking white gown. Beside her, Medea stands quietly in the dreadfully plain dress meant for a servant. The trap to paint the princess as a greedy tyrant just shattered. And that's where the story is currently at. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the recap, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe because I'll be posting new chapters as soon as they come out. See you in the next one.